Tonight's stories are calm and easy to listen to, told slowly beneath the sound of steady rain. There's a gentle darkness here, familiar and unhurried. Everything continues quietly if you drift off. Story 1, Tainted Aisles, Poisoned by Expired Goods. The night shift started like it always did, the low hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the sharp scent of motor oil and old coffee lingering in the cramped back room. I was 27, working nights to pay the rent and keep the car running. Not exactly the dream job, but it had its rhythm. Quiet hours for reading, occasional conversations with the odd traveler or trucker. Most customers were polite, some just passing through. I knew the aisles like the back of my hand, could find the cheapest candy bar or the latest energy drink without even looking. The fluorescent bulbs flickered once, then steadied. Silence. Complete silence. About midnight, the first customer arrived, a man in a faded baseball cap, shuffling toward the snack rack near the back. I caught the faint smell of cigarette smoke clinging to his jacket before he even spoke. He grabbed a bag of chips with a loose, almost careless grip and made his way to the counter. The expiration date on the bag was faded March 2019. That was 3 years ago. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You sure you want that? It's way past the date." He looked at me like I was the one who was crazy. "It's just chips," he said with a shrug. "How bad could it be?" I nodded, forcing a smile. It wasn't my place to lecture customers. Besides, no one ever got sick from a few expired snacks, right? The owner made sure we stocked the shelves from a nearby warehouse, and the products were supposed to be checked regularly. Still, the bag felt brittle in my hand, the oily residue faint but unmistakable. The man paid and left without another word. I watched him through the grimy window as he got into his beat-up pickup and drove off, headlights cutting through the darkness. Around 2 a.m, the phone rang. The shrill sound cracked the quiet, making me jump. I answered quickly. "Is this the gas station on Route 17? A faint voice asked. "Yes, it is," I replied. "Ah, I'm calling about the chips I bought earlier. I think something's wrong. My stomach's killing me, and I'm dizzy." I didn't think it was a big deal at first, but now I'm not so sure. I blinked, heart skipping. "You're the guy in the baseball cap?" "Yeah. Listen, I don't want to cause trouble, but maybe check your stock. That bag was way past the date." I told him to hang tight and that I'd look into it. The line went dead before I could get more information. I stared at the receiver, my fingers trembling slightly. The night dragged on. A couple more customers came in, mostly local night owls grabbing cigarettes or coffee. One woman bought a candy bar from a display near the register, also past its date by a few months. She left with a forced smile, clutching her purse tightly. At 3:15 a.m., the same woman stumbled back in. Her face was pale, beads of sweat forming at her hairline. I don't feel right," she said, voice trembling. "My head's pounding, and I feel nauseous." I reached out instinctively, but she waved me off. "I'm sorry, I don't know what to do." I wanted to help, but the nearest hospital was over 20 miles away, and the cell signal was patchy at best. I grabbed a bottle of water and handed it to her. "Try to sip this. Can you sit down for a bit?" She nodded, settling onto a rickety stool by the counter. Her hands shook as she pulled her jacket tighter around her. My mind raced. Was it coincidence? Food poisoning? Something else? The idea felt absurd, but my stomach twisted anyway. I pulled up the security footage on the old monitor behind the register, hoping to find clues. The grainy black and white images showed the customers entering and, after their purchases, walking out into the night. Except when I rewound the tape, something was off. The man with the baseball cap entered, but the footage showed him lingering near the snack aisle for what looked like a long time. Then, the image flickered, and suddenly he was back at the counter, paying again, as if he never left. Same for the woman, the footage looped strangely, her movements repeating in a way that didn't make sense. I frowned, rubbing my temple. Could the cameras be malfunctioning? Maybe a glitch. I wasn't a tech expert, but the footage didn't add up. I called the owner, Mr. Garrison, a gruff man who rarely came down to the station. When I told him about the customers feeling sick and the strange video, he sighed, annoyed. Expired snacks. They're perfectly safe. We've been selling those for years without issue. You're overthinking things, he said. Maybe folks are just tired, or it's something else. Stop jumping at shadows. I wanted to argue, but his voice carried that finality that made me shut up. Still, I couldn't shake the unease curling in my chest. After my shift ended, I lingered by the pumps, the cold night air sharp against my skin. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked once, twice, then silence swallowed the sound. I stared at the empty highway stretching into darkness, wondering if I was the only one seeing the cracks in the glass. The expired chips. The sickness. The footage. None of it added up. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe fatigue was playing tricks on me. Or maybe something was very wrong. The night air was colder than I expected, sharp enough to bite through my jacket as I stood outside the gas station, staring down the empty highway. Inside, the faint hum of the fluorescent lights felt oppressive, the flicker of one overhead bulb casting restless shadows along the aisles. I couldn't help but glance at the snack shelves again, the rows of chips and crackers, many past their expiration dates. The same packets the sick customers had bought. I checked the security footage more than once, I straining to catch details in the grainy black and white, the same thing every time. No one left. No one. It was impossible. I told myself I needed more evidence. Something solid. The kind that wouldn't be so easily dismissed by Mr. Garrison's gruff voice. When the morning came, gray and uninviting, I woke with a tightness in my chest. I didn't sleep well, too many half-thoughts, uneasy dreams where shadows flickered just beyond sight. After a quick breakfast that tasted dull and dry, I headed back to the station, the road still slick from an early mist. The station looked different in daylight, less sinister, but somehow quieter, as if the night had left a residue no sunlight could wash away. I started by inventorying the snack shelves, carefully noting the expiration dates. Nearly half the items were past their prime, some by months. I ran my fingers over the rough edges of the packaging, the crinkling plastic that smelled faintly stale, like old paper left too long in a damp basement. The air smelled faintly of motor oil and the chemical tang of cleaning products, but underneath all that, I thought I detected a faint sourness that made me wrinkle my nose. Next, I pulled out the store's logbook, a battered notebook Mr. Garrison kept behind the counter. Dates, deliveries, sales, it was all there in cramped handwriting. I cross-referenced the days when customers reported feeling sick against the deliveries of new stock. The timelines didn't match. The expired snacks had been sitting on shelves for months, untouched by new shipments. How could so many people get sick only in the past week? I decided to talk to the customers again, the ones who'd come in recently. I made a few calls, some answers, some dead ends. One woman, Linda, sounded shaky on the phone. She said she'd been dizzy and nauseous after buying a bag of chips from the gas station last Friday. She mentioned a strange taste, something metallic. I jotted it down, my pen scratching urgently across the paper. But when I called another, a man named Carl, he laughed it off. "I'm fine," he said. Probably just a flu or something. Don't read too much into it. Yet, Carl's voice held an edge, and I didn't buy it. People don't laugh off feeling violently sick unless they're hiding something. Back at the station, I dug deeper into the surveillance system. The cameras were old but functional, their feeds stored on a bulky DVR tucked behind the counter. I spent hours watching footage from the past 2 weeks, focusing on every customer who bought snacks. I noted the time, the items purchased, and their behavior afterward. Most left quickly, some lingered, but not one stepped outside the store afterward. No one. This time, I tried something different. I watched the footage around the timestamps of when customers supposedly left, then paused and zoomed in on the entrance. The door's glass reflected the inside lights, but no one was ever seen exiting through it. The same customers entered, purchased, and then nothing. It was as if they vanished inside. I felt my skin crawl. Surely, something about the footage was wrong. Maybe a glitch. I checked the wiring, nothing unusual. The cameras were positioned correctly, the entrance fully covered. But the videos told a different story from the one I could swear I'd seen with my own eyes. I brought it up again with Mr. Garrison the next day, hoping for some clarity. "I'm telling you, it's all fine," he said, his voice low and impatient. "Maybe your cameras are faulty. Or maybe you're imagining things. People get sick for all sorts of reasons. Don't make this bigger than it is." I tried to press him, but he cut me off, his brow furrowed. "Look, I've been running this place for years. No one's ever gotten hurt by expired snacks. You want to keep your job, I suggest you stop poking around." His tone carried a warning that tightened the muscles in my jaw. I nodded, swallowing the protest that rose in my throat. After he left, I stood alone behind the counter, the hum of the fluorescent lights suddenly oppressive. The silence felt thick, like the air, cold and heavy with silence itself, was holding its breath. That's when the first customer of the night arrived. A woman in her late 20s, her face pale and drawn. She moved slowly, clutching a small paper bag. Her eyes flickered nervously as she approached the register. "Evening," I said, forcing calm into my voice. She nodded but didn't reply. I scanned her bag discreetly. Inside, a crumpled candy bar, its wrapper faded and torn. I hesitated, feeling the weight of my suspicion pressing down harder. She paid quickly, then lingered near the door, her gaze darting toward the parking lot. "Are you all right?" I asked, stepping around the counter. She looked up sharply, then smiled weakly. "I'm fine. Just tired." Her voice was thin, brittle. I wanted to ask more, but she hurried out before I could say another word. Minutes later, the woman was back, stumbling toward the counter, her face pale now with a sheen of sweat. I think I need help," she stammered. I grabbed my phone, but no signal. Texts wouldn't send, calls wouldn't connect. The emptiness outside felt suddenly more threatening. "Where are you?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. She shook her head, eyes wide with panic. "I don't know. Everything's spinning." I pulled a chair out and sat her down, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge. The cold plastic felt slick in my hands. I handed it to her, watching as she took small sips, but her hands trembled. I glanced at the clock. Hours until morning, and the station felt like a trap closing in. More questions spiraled in my mind, twisting tighter than before. What was really in those snacks? Why did Mr. Garrison refuse to listen? And most unsettling of all, where did those customers go after they bought their food? The surveillance footage didn't show them leaving, but I'd seen them walk out the door. That contradiction was no accident. Something was very wrong. And I was right in the middle of it. The air in the break room was stale, thick with the faint scent of burnt coffee and something sour I couldn't place. My hands trembled as I stared at the wall-mounted clock, 2:17 a.m. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed unevenly, flickering like it was about to give out. Outside, the wind scraped against the windows, carrying a sharp, metallic tang that made me flinch. I kept glancing toward the door, half expecting someone or something to burst in. The memory of the last customer's pale, sweating face lingered, as if etched on the back of my eyelids. I knew I was walking into a dead end, but turning back wasn't an option anymore. After the woman's panic earlier, I tried calling for help again. No signal. Nothing. The cold realization settled over me. I was cut off. Completely isolated at this godforsaken gas station. I shoved my phone into my pocket and ran a hand through my hair, the roughness of the plaster wall grounding me for a moment. I needed answers. I had to understand what was happening to the customers, why they got sick after buying those snacks, why Mr. Garrison swore the products were fine, and most disturbingly of all, why no one ever appeared to leave the store on the surveillance footage. I forced myself to stand and walk back into the main room. The store was dim, the aisles stretching out like empty corridors. The flickering neon open sign outside cast a sickly green glow across the linoleum floor. I wasn't sure if my heartbeat or the buzzing light was louder. I made my way toward the surveillance monitors stacked behind the counter. For screens showed different angles, the entrance, the snack aisles, the checkout, and the rear exit. I'd spent hours watching that last one, waiting for a customer to step out, but the footage always ended the same way, they just disappeared. No exit. No goodbye. No door opening. I leaned closer, squinting. The images were grainy, but something caught my eye. A shadow, no, a shape lurking near the back exit. I rewound the footage, frame by frame, heart thudding in my throat. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But there it was again, a figure, blurred and indistinct, moving through the stockroom. Not a customer, but someone else. Someone who didn't appear on the customer logs or the sales receipts. My skin prickled. This wasn't just a malfunctioning surveillance system or a glitch in the recording. It was deliberate. I grabbed the keys from the counter and headed toward the back door. The metal felt cold and unyielding under my fingers, and when I tried the handle, it wouldn't budge. Locked tight. I rattled the door, the echo of the metal against the frame ringing through the empty store. Suddenly, a noise. A soft shuffle from the stockroom behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerators and the distant howl of the wind outside. I swallowed hard, forcing myself forward. The back room was cramped, stacked with boxes of snacks, most past their expiration date, their labels yellowed and peeling. I scanned the shelves, the stale air thick with dust and old grease. Then my eyes landed on a small door at the far end, half hidden behind a stack of cardboard boxes. It was heavy, industrial, like the kind you find in a basement or a loading dock. I hesitated, then pulled it open. The air hit me like a wave, damp, cold, and unmistakably musty, with a sharp undertone of something metallic. The narrow staircase beyond disappeared into darkness, the walls closing in like a tunnel. I reached for my phone's flashlight, the beam cutting a pale swath through the shadows. As I descended, the temperature dropped noticeably, the concrete steps slick with moisture. The smell grew stronger, iron mixed with rot, and a faint sound reached my ears. Low and rhythmic, like breathing, or maybe footsteps. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I couldn't. Not now. At the bottom, the space opened into a small basement room. The walls were lined with empty crates and stained tiles, and in the center stood a large metal tank with pipes sneaking out in every direction. A faint hiss escaped from somewhere, steady and mechanical. I stepped closer and noticed what looked like labels taped to the pipes. Words like contaminant and filtration were scrawled in a hasty, shaky hand. The idea of a filtration system didn't make sense. Why would a gas station have something like this hidden under the floor? Then I saw the floor. Footprints. Faint, muddy prints leading from the stairs to the tank and back again. Someone had been here recently. A sudden noise made me whip around, a door creaking somewhere above. I froze, holding my breath, straining to hear. The front door. Someone had just entered. I raced up the stairs, heart hammering, and slipped into the main room just as the bell above the entrance jingled. A man stepped inside, tall and thin, wearing a threadbare jacket. His eyes darted around nervously, like he expected to find something or someone. He moved with a strange urgency, almost like he was trying to avoid being noticed. "Can I help you?" I asked, voice tight. He flinched but nodded. "I'm looking for Mr. Garrison." "Not here," I said quickly, glancing toward the office door. "He left hours ago." The man's eyes flicked to the monitors. "Did he?" "Strange. Because I just saw him down there." "Down where?" I swallowed, suddenly cold. "Basement. Like a secret lab or something. I've been watching the cameras. You know what's really going on here?" "No," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Trust me, I was there." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "They're not selling snacks, not really. They're running tests. On people. That's why the customers don't leave. They're part of the experiment. And you," he paused, eyes locking on mine. "You're the next subject." The fluorescent light flickered again, plunging the store into brief darkness. When it came back on, the man was gone. Silence. Complete silence. My breath hitched. I looked toward the office door, the basement hatch, the front entrance. Every exit felt like a dead end. I was trapped. And whatever was happening here, there was no turning back. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, slicing through the stale air with a sickly hum. The store felt smaller somehow, like the walls were inching closer, pressing in on me. I stood frozen near the counter, the empty coffee cup in my hand trembling. The words from that man, they're running tests. On people. You're the next subject echoed in my skull. An icy knot tightened in my gut. I glanced at the office door. Closed. The basement hatch beneath it, sealed tight. My breath came shallow. The faint scent of burnt coffee lingered, bitter and acrid, mixing with the faint, musty odor that seemed to seep from beneath the door. I wanted to run, but the parking lot beyond the glass was empty, save for a single, rusted pickup truck parked under the flickering streetlight. No help out there. No witnesses. I forced myself to move, stepping toward the office cautiously. Every creak of the floorboards beneath my boots sounded like a shout in the silence. The store's overhead speakers crackled faintly, playing some old country song from the radio. I hated that song now. It was a soundtrack to something wrong, something twisted beneath the surface. My hand hovered over the doorknob. Then I heard it. A faint shuffling from below. The basement. I swallowed hard, feeling the hair on the back of my neck prickling. I should call someone. The police. Anyone. But the phone line was dead, the cord dangling uselessly from the wall near the register, and my cell had no signal this far out. I was alone. I slid the hatch open quietly, the hinges whining softly. A cool rush of damp air hit my face, smelling like earth and rust and something metallic I couldn't place, a faint copper tang that made my stomach twist. The steps creaked beneath me as I descended, each one echoing off the concrete walls of the basement. At the bottom, the light was dim, the single bulb swinging slightly, casting long, jittery shadows. The air was thick and heavy. I could hear a faint drip somewhere, water pooling in the dark corners. Then I saw it. Rows of shelves, stacked with boxes, but not the kind you'd expect in a gas station basement. These were industrial, heavy-duty crates marked with symbols I didn't recognize. Some were open, revealing strange instruments, glass vials, wires, tubes. The kind of things that didn't belong here, not in a place that sold soda and chips. And then, in the corner, a figure. A man. Pale, hunched over, clutching his stomach, sweat beading on his forehead. His skin looked clammy, almost translucent in the weak light. He rocked slightly, moaning softly. I stepped forward. "Hey," I whispered. "Are you okay?" His head snapped up, eyes wide and wild. "They're watching," he rasped. "Don't trust the cameras." My pulse jumped. "Who? Who's watching?" Before he could answer, the basement door slammed shut upstairs. The sound reverberated through the concrete like a gunshot, sharp and final. "You probably think I'm imagining things." I spun around, heart hammering. The hatch was closed. Locked. Panic hit me like a wave. I rattled the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Cold sweat broke out on my forehead. The basement was dark, cramped, and now a cage. The man groaned, collapsing onto the floor. "You're next," he whispered. "They pick who stays. Who gets sick." I wanted to help him. To get out. But the door was a solid wall. No windows here, no phone, no escape. Just the faint flicker of the light bulb and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I backed away slowly, the floor slick beneath my boots. Then I noticed something else. A small camera mounted high on the wall, its red light blinking steadily. Watching. Always watching. The truth hit me hard. The surveillance footage I'd seen earlier wasn't just recording. It was controlling. Watching us like lab rats. And the owner? He wasn't just ignoring the sickness. He was orchestrating it. But why? The question clawed at me, but there was no answer here. Only the cold, hard certainty that I was trapped in something far worse than a broken gas station or expired snacks. I moved toward the stairs again, searching for any sign of weakness. My fingers brushed against something sticky on the wall. I recoiled, catching the faint, sour smell of vomit. A stain dark and fresh. Someone else had been down here before me. Someone who didn't make it out. And if I didn't find a way, I wouldn't either. Upstairs, the store lights flickered again. A distant radio crackled to life, cutting through the silence with static and a voice I couldn't quite make out. The voice sounded urgent, desperate. I crouched in the shadows, heart pounding. The man upstairs was gone. The owner nowhere in sight. But I could hear footsteps now, soft, methodical, coming closer. I held my breath, pressing my back against the damp wall. The door at the top of the stairs creaked open slowly. Looking for me came a calm, cold voice. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The footsteps descended, slow and deliberate. I gripped the edge of the stairwell, nails digging into the concrete, trying to steady myself. The light above flickered violently. The basement seemed to close in, the walls breathing with a life I didn't want to understand. There was no place to hide. No way out. Only the truth. And whatever came next. The night air was colder than I remembered when I stepped outside the gas station, the wind cutting under my jacket with a biting insistence. I breathed in sharply, tasting the faint trace of rain yet to fall, mixed with the distant gasoline fumes lingering from the pumps. The place felt different now, like the walls had soaked up the tension from the past weeks, and it seeped out in every creak and hum. I stood under the flickering streetlight, the one that buzzed and blinked as if struggling to keep me company. My hands trembled slightly, not from cold but a gnawing mix of exhaustion and something heavier, something that settled deep in my chest like a stone. I hadn't told the owner what I found. Not yet. I wasn't sure I could. Every time I thought about it, the man's sharp, dismissive eyes flashed in my mind. "Safe as ever," he said, voice low and flat, like he was repeating a mantra. "Those snacks don't cause anything. You're imagining things." But I wasn't imagining. Not the customers collapsing, clutching their stomachs in agony. Not the sickly pallor that washed over their faces after buying those expired chips, those stale candies. And definitely not the way the surveillance footage refused to show them leaving, even when the cash register recorded a transaction. I rubbed my fingers across the rough plaster of the building's exterior, feeling the grit under my skin. The texture was honest, unchanging. Unlike everything else. Back inside, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a steady drone that pressed against my temples. The store was empty now, shelves half-stocked with products that looked harmless enough in the bright light. But I knew better. I'd seen the pattern. I'd seen the sickness. That night, I sat on the cracked linoleum floor behind the counter, laptop open, replaying footage for the 100th time. Each clip was the same. A customer walks in, grabs a snack, pays, and then something breaks. Their expressions shift, eyes glaze over, bodies falter, and yet the cameras never caught them leaving. They just vanished from the store, erased in plain sight. I felt the cold sweat prickling my scalp. Was it a glitch? A trick of the cameras? I tried to convince myself that maybe I'd misread the timestamps, that fatigue was warping my perception. But then the door jingled. I snapped my head up, heart jumping into my throat. It was Marla, the only other soul who sometimes worked here during the day. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and darting. She held a small paper bag, trembling. "Did you hear?" she whispered, voice cracking. "Old Mr. Haynes. He collapsed by the highway. Ambulance took him." I swallowed hard. "Did he buy anything here last night?" She nodded, biting her lip. "Some chips. Said they were expired but bought them anyway." The weight in my chest tightened. I closed the laptop, the screen's glow vanishing in the dim store. "We have to do something." Marla frowned, glancing toward the back office where the owner's door was shut tight. "What? Tell him?" "He won't listen." "I have to," I said, standing. My legs were stiff, but the decision rooted me. I can't just watch this happen. We walked over together. I knocked lightly, then louder when there was no answer. The door opened suddenly. The owner's face was a mask of irritation. "What now?" I took a breath, forcing my voice steady. "People are getting sick. Violently sick. It's the expired snacks." I checked the footage. He cut me off, eyes narrowing. "The footage is fine. You're seeing things you want to see. If you keep spreading these rumors, you're out." His words hit like a slap. I wanted to argue, to scream. Instead, I just shook my head and stepped back. That night, I stayed late, reviewing the footage again. I noticed something new, a faint shimmer near the exit door in several clips, like a heat haze that distorted the image. I leaned closer, heart racing. It wasn't a trick. It was a deliberate manipulation. I realized then that the owner had installed some kind of software or device to erase people from the footage, to hide them from view after they left, but the register still logged their purchases. That explained everything. But why cover it up? And what was he afraid of? The next morning, I called the local health department. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, careful not to sound hysterical. The woman on the other end was skeptical but agreed to send an inspector. Within hours, a team arrived, combing through the store's inventory. They found dozens of expired products, some far beyond their dates. Samples were taken, tested for contamination and toxins. The owner tried to argue, but the evidence was clear. The health department shut the station down. As I watched them tape the closed sign to the door, a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't justice, not really. There was no grand revelation, no heroic confrontation. Just the slow, grinding truth coming to light. I thought about the customers, how many had suffered, how many would never come back. The sense of helplessness clung to me like a shadow. But there was also relief. The weight I'd carried for weeks began to lift. Walking away from the station, the morning sun was warm on my face, the sky a pale blue streaked with clouds. The air smelled fresh, like new beginnings. I thought about what I'd learned, the way people hide things, the lengths they'll go to protect their interests, even at the cost of others' health. And I understood something about myself, too, how easy it is to doubt your own senses when the world doesn't make sense, how important it is to trust that little voice that says, this isn't right. I didn't know what came next for me, but I knew I couldn't go back to being the same person who stood behind that counter, silent and uncertain. As I walked down the cracked road, the distant hum of traffic growing louder, I felt the first genuine breath of hope in a long time. Maybe that was enough. The gas station faded behind me, a relic of sickness and secrets. But I carried the scars with me, quiet reminders of the nights I stared into the darkness and refused to look away. Story 2, Beneath the Neon Diner, Meet with a Dark Secret. I never thought a truck stop could unsettle a man the way this one did. The highway was empty, the kind of empty that presses against your ears, no hum of passing cars, no distant rumble. Just the faint whistle of wind threading through cracked pavement and scraggly sagebrush. I'd been driving since dawn, the road unspooling like a gray ribbon beneath my wheels. My eyelids were heavy, but I wasn't ready to call it quits. Not yet. I figured a meal might do me good. The truck stop looked like it had been dropped from another era, one where time forgot to keep moving forward. The neon sign buzzed and sputtered, casting a sickly blue glow onto the cracked asphalt. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of something I couldn't place. Not quite neat, but close enough to unsettle. It smelled faintly metallic, a little damp like a cellar after rain. I wrinkled my nose and rubbed my palms on my jeans. Behind the counter sat a man whose face was carved from granite, his eyes flat, watching me like I was an intruder or a puzzle. His name tag read Frank, but his expression told me he didn't much care for names or small talk. Evening, I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice cracked a little. Evening, he replied, voice low and steady like gravel sliding downhill. I slid onto a cracked vinyl stool, feeling the cold snap of the thin cushion against my skin. The diner was nearly empty except for a cluster of other truckers nursing their meals and drinks. They spoke in low tones, occasional chuckles breaking the quiet, but their eyes seemed to flicker toward me every now and then, just enough to make me uncomfortable. A waitress appeared, carrying a plate I hadn't ordered yet. She set it down in front of me without a word. I didn't order this, I said, glancing at the food. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It's what we serve. The plate held a thick slab of meat, oddly shaped and uneven. It was cooked through, glossy with a glaze that caught the dim light. I poked at it with my fork. The texture was strange, neither fibrous nor smooth, something in between. I took a tentative bite. The taste was difficult to describe. Familiar but wrong. Like a cross between pork and something wild, but with an undercurrent of bitterness that made my mouth pucker. I swallowed hard. "Where's this from?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The waitress shrugged. "Local special. You're lucky to get it. Not many outsiders get the chance." I frowned and looked around. One of the truckers, a big guy with a scar sneaking down his cheek, caught my eye and nodded toward the plate. "Eat up, friend. It's good for the road." I forced a smile, but unease was settling deep in my stomach. I wasn't hungry anymore. The waitress's smile faded. "You don't like it?" "It's just different," I said, trying to sound polite. Frank cleared his throat from behind the counter. "You best finish what you're given," he said, voice colder now. I blinked. "Excuse me?" "We don't waste food here," he said, stepping closer so the shadows from the overhead light carved hard lines across his face. "Especially not the special meat." I glanced at the other truckers. Their eyes were sharper now, less friendly, watching me like hawks circling prey. I set down my fork, swallowing the growing lump in my throat. "I'm not hungry anymore," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The scar-faced man leaned over the table. Last guy who walked out without finishing didn't make it out at all. I blinked again, trying to make sense of the words. "What do you mean?" Frank's lips twitched into something that almost looked like a smile, but it was colder than the night air outside. "He left hungry. Stayed hungry." His voice dropped. "And stayed put, too." A chill ran down my spine. The diner's hum felt heavier, thicker. The smell in the air grew stronger, pressing against my nostrils like a warning. I looked out the grimy window at the highway stretching into darkness. No cars. No signs of life. Just the faint, flickering glow of the neon sign and the whisper of wind. I wanted to leave. Badly. But as I reached for my jacket, the waitress appeared again, her eyes steady and unblinking. "The road's long and lonely," she said softly. "But here, you're safe. Just eat." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of 1,000 eyes, the silence stretching taut around me. I did not want to eat that meat. I did not want to stay. But somewhere beneath the hum of the fluorescent lights, the unspoken rules of this place were clear. No one left hungry. Not ever. Reluctantly, I picked up the fork, its cold metal unfamiliar in my trembling hand. The scent was faintly metallic, mingled with something earthy, almost sweet. As the first bite touched my tongue, a warmth spread through me, not from the food itself, but from the inexplicable comfort settling in my chest. The room's edges seemed to soften, the oppressive quiet easing just enough to let a small flicker of calm in. The waitress watched me, her face unreadable. "You'll need your strength," she said, voice a whisper that barely stirred the air. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows like distant thunder. Somewhere deep down, I knew leaving tonight meant confronting more than just the road ahead. The plate sat in front of me, half empty now, the meat's strange texture still lingering on my tongue. The waitress didn't move. Her eyes, sharp and steady, held mine through the dim light flickering overhead. No smile, no blink. Just that quiet insistence. "You'll need your strength," she said again, voice low, almost a warning. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes like a warning knock, the night thickening beyond the glass. I took a breath and tried to steady my shaking hands. The air smelled faintly of diesel and frying grease, mixed with the odd scent of damp wood and something I couldn't place, something cold and faintly sharp, like old metal left out in the rain. I swallowed hard. My mind was spinning, but I kept my voice even. Why do you serve this meat? What is it? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she leaned in just a bit, the faint click of her boots on linoleum the only sound breaking the silence. Drivers need to eat, she said slowly. This is what we have. That wasn't an answer. Not really. I glanced around the room again. The other truckers were quiet, watching me with those cold eyes, like I was some new puzzle dropped into their world. The man in the corner with the scarred hands was stirring his coffee slowly, never looking away. The older woman behind the counter was wiping down the same spot over and over, her movements mechanical. I felt a flicker of something. Was it fear? No. Something sharper. Suspicion. The weight of their gazes felt like a physical thing, pressing down on my shoulders, making my skin crawl. I wanted to leave, but the waitress's words echoed in my mind. The last driver who refused never left. I pushed the plate away, just a little, as if that would be enough to say I was done. The room shifted. The silence thickened. The scarred man's eyes narrowed. The waitress's lips twitched, almost like a smile, but colder, empty. You better finish that, she said, voice steady now. Not eating, well, it comes with consequences. I swallowed again, hard. My mouth was dry. Look, I'm just passing through. I don't want any trouble. She cocked her head. No trouble here. Just rules. Rules. That word settled over me like a stone in a pond, sending ripples through my thoughts. What kind of place was this? And how had I ended up here, in this quiet trap where the food was strange and the people colder still? When I finally finished the plate, each bite an effort, the room seemed to exhale. The waitress nodded once, as if confirming some unspoken promise. Good. You'll sleep better. I wanted to believe her, but the knot in my stomach tightened. Outside, the wind howled louder, rattling the windows with a sudden fury, as if the storm was knocking at the edges of the world. I stared out, watching the dark shapes of trucks resting in the lot, their engines silent, their drivers nowhere to be seen. I lay down later that night on the narrow cot in the back room. The waitress had shown me a room with peeling wallpaper and a window so grimy the streetlight outside was little more than a dull glow. The strange taste of the meat lingered in my mouth, and despite the warmth she promised, my body felt chilled all the way to the bone. Sleep was slow to come. I kept hearing voices, not loud, but whispers, like the walls themselves were listening and talking. Or maybe it was just the wind again, pushing through the cracks in the old building. When I finally drifted off, it was to dreams that tasted like iron and cold earth. I woke before dawn, the quiet outside broken by the distant hum of a diesel engine starting. I stayed in the diner until the morning light spilled in, watching the few remaining truckers come and go. I asked questions, careful, watching their faces. They dodged answers, shrugged, or just stared at me. The meat was always the same, always mysterious. One of the drivers finally spoke up. A thin man with graying hair and tired eyes. You don't want to get too curious round here, he said quietly, glancing over his shoulder like he expected someone to be listening. Not everyone leaves the way they came in. And it ain't just the meat. It's the place. The people. I pressed him for more, but he only shook his head, his voice dropping even lower. Last guy who tried to skip the meal? Gone. Just gone. They say he took off down the highway, but no one saw him after. No calls, no nothing. I could feel my throat tightening, a dry lump forming. The stories were half whispers, half warnings, but they all pointed one way. This place wasn't just a stop on the road. It was a trap. I thought about the waitress again. Her cold insistence, her words like a promise and a threat all at once. You'll need your strength. For what? A long haul? A fight? Or something I couldn't yet see? I needed to figure out what was really going on before I got stuck here too. But how do you unravel a place that doesn't want its secrets told? And how do you leave when the people around you are watching every move, waiting for you to slip? That afternoon, I went back through the diner's kitchen entrance, pretending to head to the bathroom, but really just trying to peek behind the scenes. The smell hit me first, something sour, coppery, and faintly sweet again. The air was thick and warm, like a cellar in summertime. There were no signs of a butcher's block or a freezer large enough to hold anything unusual. Just the usual pots and pans, a cluttered counter with jars of pickles and some cans stacked haphazardly. But the back door, heavy and metal, was locked tight. Locked from the inside. I knocked. No answer. I pressed my ear to the door and caught a faint thud, something heavy moving, slow, deliberate. I stepped back, heart hammering. When I turned, the scarred man was there, silent, standing close enough I could smell the faint trace of tobacco and sweat mixed in his rough clothes. His voice was low, almost tired. Don't poke around where you don't belong. I forced a smile. Just curious. This place is different. He studied me for a moment, then nodded once. Different's right. You best be careful. I could feel the weight of the warning settle over me like a thick fog. I wanted to ask more, to press for answers, but something in his eyes told me the questions weren't safe. So I left the kitchen, back into the dining room's stale air, where the light flickered unevenly overhead and the taste of that strange meat still haunted my senses. I sat back down at my table, the plate already gone, but the scent of it lingering. The waitress appeared again, silent, carrying a fresh cup of coffee that smelled bitter and burnt. You'll be leaving soon, she said softly, eyes flickering with something I couldn't place. But remember, this place has a way of holding on. You finish what you're given. That's the rule. I nodded, though the words felt like chains tightening around me. I wanted to stand, to walk straight out into the cold morning, but the weight of those eyes, the scarred man, the waitress, the others, made my legs feel rooted. Outside, the wind picked up again, shaking the windows as if the storm was gathering itself for something bigger. I didn't know what was coming next, but I knew I couldn't stay long. Not without answers. Not without a plan. And I sure as hell wasn't going to eat another bite unless I had to. The coffee sat steaming in front of me, dark and bitter, but I barely touched it. My mind was still tangled in the scarred man's warning. Don't poke around where you don't belong. Simple words, but heavy with something darker than just a gruff caution. I looked around the diner again. The faded linoleum, the flickering overhead light, the low murmur of the few locals scattered at tables. Everything felt suffocating in a way I couldn't put my finger on. Like this place had swallowed more than just time. A few feet away, the waitress refilled a patron's cup without a word, her face blank, eyes distant. I caught a glimpse of the plate in front of the man, same odd meat. Grayish, almost rubbery-looking chunks that didn't match any cut I knew. I tried to focus on anything normal, but each breath carried that strange, metallic scent that clung to my clothes and skin like a bad memory. I traced my gaze back to the scarred man, still standing near the kitchen doorway. His eyes were sharp now, the tiredness gone. When they met mine, I could almost swear he was weighing me. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. Look, I'm not here to cause trouble. I don't understand what this place is. What you all eat. He didn't answer right away. Then, surprisingly, he motioned me to follow him out the back door. The sudden invitation threw me off balance, but curiosity won. I left my half-finished coffee and stepped outside with him into the chill night air. The parking lot was nearly empty, the gravel cold and rough under my boots. A faint hum of insects buzzed somewhere nearby, but otherwise, silence. The scarred man led me to an old, rusted shipping container set against the wall of the diner. He fumbled with a padlock, then pulled the door open. Inside, dim light revealed stacked crates and barrels, their labels faded and unreadable. "This ain't just a truck stop," he said, voice lower now, almost grim. "It's a trap. A business. And those who come through here, they either eat or they stay." I blinked, trying to process. "Stay? Like, never leave?" He nodded. "Last guy who tried to skip the meal? He's still around. Only you don't see him no more. Not 'cause he left." A cold shiver ran down my spine. The meaning was clear enough. Those folks who refused to meet didn't just get turned away, they disappeared. I wanted to ask how or why, but the man's expression shut me down before I could speak. "Why? What's in the meat?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. He glanced over his shoulder, as if the night itself might be listening. "Don't matter what it is. It's the deal we make. You eat, you keep moving. You don't, you're part of the family. Permanently." "Family?" I echoed, the word tasting like ash. "What kind of family keeps people there?" He shrugged, then leaned closer, voice barely audible. "One that's learned not to ask questions." Behind us, a door creaked open. I spun around. The waitress from inside was standing there, arms crossed, watching. Her eyes cold, unreadable. "You gonna eat, or you gonna make this harder?" Her tone was flat, but something in it made my stomach twist. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just want to leave." "You can't," she said, stepping forward. "Not until you finish your plate." The scarred man gave me one last look, then turned and disappeared back inside. I was alone with her now, the weight of the night pressing down like a stone. I wanted to laugh, to shake it off as some twisted joke, but the tightness in my chest wouldn't let me. The diner's doors were still open behind me, but I knew that driving off now wouldn't be simple. The roads were dark, the trucks gone, and the locals' eyes followed every move I made. "Look," I said, trying to reason with her, "I'm tired. I've got miles to go. I don't want any trouble." Her lips twitched, almost a smile. "Trouble's already here," she said. "You just don't see it yet." The night air felt colder, sharper. I realized I'd been holding my breath. My hands trembled slightly, fingers curling into fists. The diner's strange meat, the silent warnings, the vanished drivers, it all pressed in like a vice tightening around my throat. I stepped back toward the door, hoping to slip inside, but she blocked my path. "Sit. Eat. Then you can think about moving on." No one else stirred inside, but from the shadowed corners, I sensed other eyes. Watching. Waiting. I swallowed hard, the taste of that unknown meat still lingering on my tongue. My plate was gone, but the memory of it was a chain I couldn't break. I was caught, no doubt. And the choice wasn't mine anymore. The door slammed shut behind me, and the flickering light overhead went dark. Silence. Complete silence. The darkness swallowed the diner whole. The overhead light had died with a flicker, like a candle guttering before its last breath. Outside, the wind stirred dead leaves across cracked asphalt, scraping faintly against the building like nails on a chalkboard. I stood frozen, half in, half out, the cold night air sinking into my skin, but the weight pressing on my chest was something else. something heavier. The silence inside was thick, a suffocating blanket that muffled even the faintest sound. Her eyes caught mine again, no warmth, no invitation, just that cold, steady insistence. Sit. Eat. Then you can think about moving on, she said, voice low but sharp, slicing through the quiet like a scalpel. I swallowed hard, the bitter taste of that unnameable meat lingering at the back of my throat, twisting my stomach into knots. I took a step back, hoping to pass her, but she shifted, blocking the door with an effortless calm that made my skin crawl. The shadows along the walls seemed to stretch and lean forward, like they were waiting for something to happen. Waiting for me to make a mistake. I'm not hungry, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though it cracked on the last word. Her lips twitched again, almost a smile. You're here now. You'll eat. That's the way it works. I glanced around the room. The booths were empty, but the dim outlines of bodies sat motionless in the corners, faces obscured by shadow. I could feel them watching, their silence heavy and patient. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. I thought about the last driver, the one who refused to eat and never left. What had happened to him? Where was he now? The thought hit me with a cold certainty. Whatever this place was, it didn't let people go. The wind howled outside, rattling the broken window panes. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, sharp and lonely, but no one answered. The silence pressed in again. I could almost hear my own heartbeat, loud and frantic in my ears. Look, I said, trying to reason with her, I don't want any trouble. I have miles to cover. I just want to leave. Her gaze didn't waver. Trouble's already here, she said, voice low and steady. You just don't see it yet. I swallowed the lump in my throat, fighting the rising panic. My legs felt like they were made of lead, but I forced myself to step deeper inside, toward the counter where the plate had been. It was gone, but I knew they'd bring another. It was only a matter of time. Why? Why can't I just go? The words came out quieter than I expected. She leaned closer, eyes gleaming in the darkness. Because you haven't finished your meal. And because no one who refuses to eat leaves. A shiver ran down my spine. The room seemed to close in, the walls pressing inward like they wanted to trap me. I looked to the far corner, where a faint glow flickered behind a grimy window. Movement. A shadow shifted, too slow to be natural. I wanted to run, but my feet stayed rooted. The thought of the unknown meat, the vanished drivers, and the cold, silent crowd made my skin crawl. I felt like a rat in a trap, the walls tightening around me. Please, I said, voice trembling now, I'm not your enemy. She straightened up, a slow, deliberate movement that filled the space with quiet menace. You don't get to choose that. Not here. Behind her, the shadows stirred. A figure stepped forward, a man with eyes like hard stones, expression unreadable. He didn't say a word, but the weight of his presence was enough. I could smell the faint scent of tobacco and something metallic, like old blood. The coldness in the room deepened. I realized then that this wasn't just about the meat or the diner. It was about control. About a place that fed on fear and obedience, where resistance meant erasure. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep the panic from taking over. I needed a way out. But every glance around reminded me the exit was behind her, and she wasn't moving. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant hum of a truck engine starting somewhere far away. I swallowed again, tasting bile. The cold air was sharp, but the room felt suffocating. Then, from the far side of the diner, a soft sound, a chair scraping against the floor. Another figure emerged, this one older, with eyes that flickered like candlelight. She wore a tired smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Jack, she said, voice soft but firm, you're tired. Hungry, even if you don't want to admit it. You came here for rest. This is what we offer. I wanted to tell her no. To shout that I didn't belong. But the words caught in my throat. Eat, she said, sliding a fresh plate toward me through the dim light. The smell was faint but familiar. Meat, yes, but something else, something wrong. I stared at it. The piece was smaller this time, less menacing. A chance. But my hands trembled too much to reach for it. Why? I whispered, why do you do this to us? Her smile didn't falter. Because some things don't leave. Some debts must be paid. The other man moved closer, his eyes boring into mine. No words, just a silent command. I felt the weight of every driver who came before me, swallowed by the darkness, lost to the night. I swallowed hard, the taste of fear thick in my mouth. The room waited. The night waited. I reached out, fingers hovering over the plate. The door behind me creaked open. A figure stood there, silhouetted by the cold moonlight outside. Not one of them. Someone else. Someone real. Or maybe just a trick of the light. I blinked, heart pounding. The figure took a step forward, and the night held its breath. I had a choice. Crazy, right? But I wasn't sure I had the strength to make it. The figure stepped fully into the dim light, a man, older than me by at least a decade, wearing a stained denim jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over tired eyes. The plate sat between us, the strange meat glistening under the flickering fluorescent bulb, its texture still impossible to place. My fingers twitched. I wanted to pull back, run for the door, but the man's gaze held me steady, silently urging me forward. Eat it, he said, voice low and rough, but not cruel. You don't have to, but you'll never leave if you don't. I blinked. How do you know? He shrugged, the movement stiff like a man and used to freedom. I was a fool, same as you. Tried to skip the meal once. Never got past the parking lot. They don't say what happens, but you're stuck here, somehow. Like a ghost. His eyes flicked to the others at the counter, their faces unreadable, shadows in the half-light. I swallowed a lump that wouldn't go down. You're still here. Yeah. His smile was bitter. Somehow, I'm still here. But I'm done playing along. He looked at the plate, then back at me. If you want out, you've got to eat. I stared at the meat. The smell was faintly metallic, almost antiseptic, like the inside of a hospital room. I thought of the other drivers, missing, vanished into this place. I thought of the cold insistence in their eyes. The way they cornered me, all but forcing me to swallow. But I could feel something else now, a crack in their armor. The man shifted, his voice dropping to a whisper. The last guy who refused. They never found him. But the truth is, it's not the meat itself. It's the submission. They want you to give in. To accept it. Once you do, you're theirs. Forever. I wanted to ask what theirs meant, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I looked around the room, the peeling wallpaper, the cracked linoleum floor, the old jukebox humming softly in the corner, playing a scratchy country tune that didn't belong here anymore. This place wasn't supernatural. It was human. A trap built from fear and control, served on a plate. I was tired. Bone-deep tired from the endless miles, the constant road noise, the loneliness that gnawed at me like a rat. But I wasn't ready to give up, not like that. I don't want to be here, I said quietly. Neither do I, he replied. But we are. until we decide we're not. The others shifted, unease flickering across their faces. The man took a deep breath, then stood up straighter. Look, there's a way. You don't have to eat the meat to get out. You just have to show them you're not afraid. My hands clenched into fists. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think this was some kind of test, a twisted game I could beat. But the truth was, I didn't know if I had the strength left. The silence stretched. Then the man reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled pack of cigarettes. He offered one to me. Smoke. I took it, the paper rough against my fingertips. The smell of tobacco was a strange comfort. I lit it with a shaky hand, the flame briefly illuminating my face, the flicker of hope and doubt tangled there. We smoked in silence. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, carrying the distant howl of a dog or maybe a coyote. Back inside, the others watched, waiting, their patience thinning. I looked down at the plate again. The meat wasn't the enemy. It was the fear, the acceptance of a fate I didn't want. The man was right. If I wanted out, I had to show them I wasn't theirs. I pushed the plate away slowly, deliberately. The clatter echoed louder than I expected. I met their eyes, steady as I could manage. I'm not eating it, I said. A murmur rippled through the room. The warmth drained from the faces around me, replaced by something colder. The man beside me tensed but didn't move. You don't understand, one of them said, voice low but hard. You've got to finish what you start. I shook my head, heart pounding. No, I don't. The room held its breath. Then, one by one, the locals turned away, their faces unreadable. The man next to me stood as well. Come on, he said quietly. Let's get out of here. I hesitated, then followed him through the back door. The night air hit me like a splash of cold water, sharp, real, alive. The diner's neon sign flickered behind us, casting a sickly glow over the cracked pavement. We walked without speaking, the silence comfortable now, filled with the sound of our footsteps and the distant hum of the highway. I don't know what happens to the others, the man said after a while. But I'm done being one of them. Maybe you can be, too. I nodded, the weight in my chest lifting just a fraction. The road stretched out ahead, dark and endless, but for the first time in days, it felt like a path to somewhere anywhere but here. The next morning, I woke in a cheap motel room miles down the highway, the taste of smoke still lingering on my tongue. I looked at my hands, rough and calloused, and felt the echo of that night settle deep inside me. I wasn't sure if I'd ever forget what happened at the truck stop, the strange meat, the cold eyes, or the man who'd helped me escape. But I knew one thing for certain, I'd carry the memory with me, a warning and a scar. Back on the road, I kept the windows down, the fresh air cutting through the stale remnants of fear. The highway stretched out like a promise, endless and unforgiving. I didn't know if I was free or just running. Maybe it didn't matter. What mattered was that I'd chosen not to stay. Some debts don't disappear. Some things don't leave. But sometimes, you have to fight for the chance to keep moving forward. The diner faded behind me, a ghost in the rearview mirror. I didn't look back. Story 3, Digital Doppelgänger, Hijacked Online Identity. I woke up to the sound of a distant lawnmower humming through the narrow cracks of my bedroom window, the sharp scent of freshly cut grass mingling with the faint, sour tang of last night's cold coffee lingering on the bedside table. I stretched, the worn cotton sheet scraping against my forearm, and reached for my phone. It was face down on the nightstand, like always, but when I flipped it over, my stomach clenched. Notifications. More than usual. Too many, actually. And the first thing I saw was a message from Claire, my coworker. Are you seriously going to say that about me? On Instagram? You owe me an explanation. I blinked. I hadn't posted anything about Claire. Not even remotely close. I swiped down to the timeline and there it was, a comment under a photo of hers, something snide and personal, the kind of thing I wouldn't say aloud, let alone type in public. The words were sharp, sarcastic, and completely out of character, both for me and our usually easygoing friendship. I tapped on the post to see when it had gone up. 30 minutes ago. I'd been asleep. My fingers trembled as I refreshed my feed. There were more, dozens of comments and posts that sounded like conversations I never had. I scrolled through them, disbelief growing into a knot of worry in my chest. One post was a direct message I supposedly sent to my brother, accusing him of something petty and cruel. Another was a tweet about a political rant I didn't remember typing, one that contradicted everything I usually stood for. I stared at the screen as if it might suddenly rearrange itself into something sensible. But no! The digital version of me was out there, saying things I hadn't said. Things I'd never say. I shut the phone and sat on the edge of the bed, the rough plaster of the wall pressing cold and uneven against my back. What was happening? Was I hacked? Could someone have broken into my accounts? I wasn't exactly a high-profile target. I'm not even that active online, truth be told. Mostly just the usual posts about weekend plans, the occasional photo of my dog, and the kind of half-hearted banter that fills the quiet spaces between work emails and errands. The air in my room felt thick, like it was holding its breath. I got up and went to the kitchen, where the smell of stale toast and spilled orange juice greeted me. I ran cold water over my face, the shock of it waking me up a little more. Light from the cracked window slanted across the linoleum floor, dust motes floating lazily in the beam. The familiar, the mundane, offered no comfort. I pulled out my laptop and logged into my accounts, fingers crossing. The passwords all worked, but the activity log showed something odd. Logins at strange hours, from devices I didn't recognize. IP addresses from the other side of town, places I'd never been to. Someone had taken control. My heart hammered in a way that felt almost physical, as if my ribcage were a cage tightening around my lungs. I shut the laptop abruptly, not ready to stare at the screen any longer. Instead, I sat back in the creaky kitchen chair and tried to piece this together. Who would do this? Why? And how? I knew plenty of people who'd be annoyed by a sarcastic post or two, but this felt personal, targeted. Like someone was carefully picking apart my relationships, trying to sow chaos. My brother's text inbox was probably filling up with messages he'd never get from me. Claire was already upset. What about my coworkers? My friends? Would they believe the things I was supposedly saying? I thought about calling Claire, but the tight knot in my stomach made me hesitate. What if I sounded panicked? What if she thought I was lying? Or worse, that I'd lost it? Instead, I tried to think logically. I could change my passwords, enable two-factor authentication. That was what people always said to do. But if someone had remote access already, would that stop them? Or would they just find another way in? I glanced toward the hallway mirror. My reflection looked tired, pale in the morning light, eyes shadowed and unfocused. The silence in the apartment felt heavier now, almost oppressive. I could hear the faint creak of the heating pipes, the distant murmur of a television from the apartment below. Normal noises, but somehow they made the quiet in my chest feel louder. I went back to my phone and opened the direct messages. One from someone named M. A single sentence, "You're not in control anymore." No name, no hint, just those 4 words. I stared at it, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Was this a threat? A joke? Or some kind of sick game? I didn't respond. Instead, I locked the phone and sat back down at the kitchen table. My dog, Max, padded into the room, his nails clicking softly on the tile. He looked at me with those wide, trusting eyes, and I reached out to scratch behind his ears. The familiar warmth of his fur was oddly grounding. But even Max couldn't chase away the creeping feeling that something had shifted. My digital self was no longer mine. Someone else was writing the story now. I rubbed my temples and tried to remember if I'd noticed anything strange in the last few days. No odd calls, no unfamiliar emails. Nothing out of place, really. But maybe I hadn't been paying attention. Maybe I'd ignored the signs. The thought made my skin crawl. Outside, the city continued its slow pulse. Somewhere nearby, a siren wailed briefly before fading into the distance. The smell of rain hung in the air, sharp and cool. I stood and walked to the window, pressing my palm against the glass. The world looked the same, but I knew it wasn't. Because my life, my identity, was already unraveling, one manipulated post at a time. And I had no idea who was pulling the strings. I stayed by the window long after the city swallowed the siren's wail. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, or worse, pulling the strings just out of sight. My posts, the ones I hadn't written, felt like ghostly fingerprints left by a stranger on my digital skin. And each message, each conversation I never had, was a thread in a web I didn't know I was caught in until it tightened around my neck. Morning came sluggishly, gray and heavy with clouds. I woke up stiff, the taste of stale coffee lingering at the back of my throat from the night before. Max nudged my hand, demanding breakfast, dragging me back to the present. I shuffled to the kitchen, the floor cold under my bare feet. My phone buzzed with notifications, the screen lighting up with a glow that made me flinch. The messages weren't from friends or family. They were from strangers, aggressive and confused, people forwarding screenshots of posts I hadn't made, comments I never typed. I sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through the chaos. Someone had posted a private conversation between me and Sarah, my closest friend. But I'd never had that conversation. The words were cruel, accusatory, and completely out of character. I tapped the screen again and again, hoping for a glitch, a mistake, anything but this digital betrayal. I called Sarah. Her voicemail picked up after the third ring. I left a message, my voice shaky despite my efforts to sound calm. "Hey, it's me. We need to talk. Something weird is happening." I spent the rest of the morning digging through my accounts, hunting for signs of intrusion. My passwords felt inadequate, like flimsy locks on a door someone had already picked. Every security question I answered felt like a trapdoor swinging open beneath me. There were no obvious breaches, no new devices logged in, no strange IP addresses. But the evidence was undeniable. Someone was controlling my online presence. I opened my laptop and started a spreadsheet, cataloging every strange post, every odd comment. Timestamps, platforms, content. The pattern was subtle, but it was there. The intrusions happened mostly late at night, between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. when I was asleep, safe, or so I thought. The thought made my skin crawl again. I told myself to breathe, to think, to act. That afternoon, I met Sarah at the cafe where we'd spent so many afternoons talking about everything and nothing. She looked tired, her eyes bloodshot, clutching her coffee cup like it was a life raft. I slid the phone across the table, showing her the screenshots. "This isn't me," I said, voice low. "I swear, I didn't say any of this." She studied the screen for a long moment, then looked up. "It's like someone's trying to ruin you." "But why? And how?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that my digital self was no longer mine, and that reality was starting to bleed into the world outside the screen. Later, back home, I found myself pacing the apartment, the air thick with the smell of damp clothes and old books. The rain had stopped, leaving a fresh, earthy scent in its wake. My phone buzzed again. Another notification. This time, it was a direct message from an account I didn't recognize. The message was brief, chillingly casual. You can't hide. I froze. The words felt like cold fingers tracing my spine. Max looked up, ears perked, sensing the shift in the room. I tried to steady my breathing, but my hands trembled as I typed a reply. Who is this? No response. I decided to check the security settings on my accounts once more, this time with more scrutiny. I found what I hadn't seen before, a series of linked devices I didn't own, strange locations logged in cities I'd never been. Someone was moving through my digital life like a ghost, erasing footprints behind them. That night, I couldn't sleep. The shadows in my apartment seemed to deepen, stretching across the walls like dark fingers. Every creak of the old building made my heart skip. I kept the dim light that cast long, dancing shadows on, the hum of my laptop the only company in the quiet. And then, a text from my phone's number. It wasn't just online anymore. The threat had crossed into my real world. Look outside. I hesitated, staring at the screen, the glow illuminating the tense lines on my face. Outside my window, the street was empty, bathed in the sickly yellow of the sodium lamps. No movement, no sign of anyone at all. But I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on me, watching, waiting. I closed the curtains slowly, the fabric whispering against the glass. Max jumped onto my lap, his warmth a small comfort against the growing chill inside me. The digital storm was no longer just a problem of hacked accounts or manipulated posts. It was personal. It was real. And I was running out of time. I needed help. But who could I trust when my own reflections were lies? I stared at the phone one last time before setting it down, the screen dark and silent. Tomorrow, I decided, I would find answers. Because right now, the only thing certain was this: my life had become a trap, and the cage was closing fast. The weight of unseen eyes pressed heavier with each passing second, tightening the noose around my fractured reality. I didn't sleep that night. By dawn, my phone vibrated relentlessly. I ignored it, but curiosity gnawed at me. The notifications weren't random anymore. They were targeted messages from people I'd never texted, posts tagging me in conversations I hadn't joined, pictures I didn't take. This wasn't just hacking. Someone was puppeteering my digital life, and worse, they were shaping the narrative. I tried calling Sarah first. My voice sounded brittle when she answered. "Hey, you okay? Your last post, it sounded really off." Her hesitation was a crack in the facade I'd been trying to maintain. Before I could explain, she cut in. "Look, something weird's going on. I saw comments from you about things we never discussed. And then that message you sent last night, the one about letting go. It's not like you." Her words hung between us, heavier than the humid morning air. I blinked away the sudden sting behind my eyes. I don't know what to say. "I swear, I didn't write that." "Maybe someone else did," she suggested, voice low. "Someone who knows you." That phrase echoed in my mind long after the call ended. Someone who knew me. Someone who understood the fine lines of my life well enough to weave themselves into it. And here's the brutal truth. That meant I wasn't just a victim of random cybercrime. This was personal. I sat back, rubbing my temples as the early sunlight slanted in through the blinds. The apartment smelled faintly of old coffee and dust, comforting in its mundanity. But beneath that, there was something else, A faint metallic scent, like pennies left too long in a damp pocket. I sniffed the air again. It was probably nothing. Or maybe the lingering smell of fear. My phone pinged again. A new message. This time, from an unknown number. Don't try to run. You're already mine. The words were cold, clinical, like a doctor delivering a diagnosis no one wants to hear. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands trembled as I scrolled backwards, searching for clues, for a name, a hint, anything. Nothing. I closed my eyes. The room felt suddenly too small, the walls inching closer as if they were listening. I wanted to scream into the void, to shatter the silence. Instead, I did the only thing I could. I reached for my laptop. I needed to trace this. To find the source. To stop it. Hours passed as I dug through logs, IP addresses, login histories. Most were proxies, bouncing signals through layers I couldn't penetrate. But then, a name flickered on the screen, faint but unmistakable. Eli. I froze. Eli. That was the guy I'd met 2 years ago at that art show downtown. The one who'd seemed charming, a little too intense. The one I'd brushed off after a few awkward encounters. I never heard from him again until now. Could it really be him? I tried calling, but the phone went straight to voicemail. I left a message, forcing my voice to sound casual. Hey, Eli. Look, I don't know what's going on, but if you're behind this, we need to talk. No reply. The day dragged on, heavy and gray. I avoided my phone, but it kept buzzing, friends asking questions, acquaintances sharing screenshots of my weird posts. I was becoming a ghost in my own life, watched and whispered about from behind screens. By evening, the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't just log out. I couldn't just delete accounts or change passwords. This wasn't a glitch. It was a takeover. And every move I made, every attempt to reclaim control, only tightened the snare. I paced the apartment, my feet scraping against the rough wooden floor. Max followed, his nails tapping in rhythm. I looked out the window again. The street was still empty, but now I noticed a faint glow of a figure standing just beyond the lamplight. Head down, hands shoved deep in pockets. Watching. I blinked. The figure vanished. My breath caught. Was this paranoia? Or was Eli closer than I thought? I locked the door, double-checked the windows, and then sat back down at the desk. The screen glowed in the dim light, reflecting the sharp lines on my face. I typed a message into a new, anonymous account. Why are you doing this? Seconds later, the reply came. Because you left me behind. The words seared through me. Not just a threat, but a twisted confession. Someone who felt betrayed. Someone who knew me too well. I swallowed hard. There was no going back now. I was trapped inside a story I hadn't written, with a villain who'd stepped out of my past to claim the present. And the worst part? I had no idea how far they were willing to go. The screen flickered, then blinked out. Darkness. My phone buzzed once more. A new message. Meet me tomorrow. Midnight. The old cafe on 5th. Come alone. I stared at the words, heart hammering so loudly I was sure the neighbors could hear. I wanted to delete it. To run. But something inside me, maybe stubbornness, maybe desperation, made me type back. Fine. I hit send. Then sat back, the night pressing in from all sides. There was no turning back. Not anymore. The silence that followed felt heavier than the message itself. I glanced at the clock, just hours until midnight. Questions swirled, but answers now belonged to the shadows waiting at the cafe. Midnight came on the heels of a restless afternoon, the kind where every shadow seems to stretch just a little too long, and the air tastes faintly metallic as if the city itself is holding its breath. I told myself it was just a meeting. Maybe a chance to end this nightmare, or at least understand it. But every instinct screamed caution. Still, I couldn't let fear win. Not yet. The hours dragged. I tried to eat something, half-heartedly gnawing on a sandwich that tasted like stale bread and cold ham, but my stomach churned. The fluorescent kitchen light flickered above me, buzzing faintly like a dying fly. I thought about calling someone. Anyone. But who? Lisa? She'd already pulled away, distant and wary after the posts. Mark? No. They'd both been caught in the crossfire, their trust shredded by words I never typed. I checked my phone again. Nothing new. No threats, no hints, just the steady pulse of the battery icon. Then, around 11:30, I stuffed on a jacket, grabbed my keys, and stepped out into the chill night. The city was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort but presses down, thick and heavy, like wet wool settling on your skin. The streetlights flickered intermittently, casting long, trembling shadows on cracked sidewalks. I walked fast, my breath coming out in sharp little clouds, eyes darting to every darkened doorway and alley. The old cafe on 5th was a place I hadn't thought about in years. The kind of place where time seemed to stall, coated in a layer of dust and faded memories. The windows were grimy, the neon sign buzzing weakly with a sickly blue glow. The door creaked when I pushed it open, and the smell hit me immediately, stale coffee, old cigarette smoke, and something else, sharp and unsettling, like cold iron. The cafe was mostly empty. A few late-night drifters hunched over chipped mugs, eyes red from too much screen time or too little sleep. The clink of spoons against ceramic echoed off cracked tiles. I scanned the room, heart thudding so hard I thought everyone would hear it. Then I saw him. Standing by the back counter, leaning against the worn wood with a casualness that didn't fit the tension in the air. His face was shadowed under a low cap, but I recognized the sharp line of his jaw, the way he held himself like he owned the silence. "You came," he said without looking up. His voice was low, calm, but with an edge that sliced through the quiet. I swallowed. "Who are you? Why are you doing this?" He finally lifted his gaze, eyes like cold glass, reflecting the flickering neon. "You really don't know? After everything?" I felt a wave of nausea. "I don't understand. None of this makes sense." He laughed, a sound that was more bitter than amused. "It should. You took something from me. More than you realize." I clenched my fists. "I don't know what you mean." "You do. Or at least you did, before you deleted me from your life. Before you erased me." The words hit me like a blow. I remembered. Him. Alex. We'd been close once, too close, maybe, and I thought I was done with him. But he wasn't done with me. Why the posts? The messages? Why ruin everything I have? My voice shook, not with fear but with anger. He shrugged, almost casual. Control. Influence. Power over a story that's been written without me. You think you're the only author here? No. You're just a character in my chapter now. The cafe's lights flickered again, and somewhere in the back, a dog barked sharply, breaking the stillness. I could taste the coppery tang of adrenaline on my tongue, my skin prickling as if something beneath my ribs was about to burst. He stepped closer. "You should have been careful who you crossed." not just online, real life. Your friends, your reputation, they're all fragile things. Easy to shatter. I took a breath, steadying myself. What do you want from me? His eyes narrowed, calculating. I want you to understand what it's like to lose control. To have your life rewritten by someone else. To be trapped. Trapped. The word echoed inside me, tighter and tighter until I felt like I was drowning in it. I'm done playing your games, I said, voice hardening. You want a showdown? Fine. But it ends here. He smiled then, slow, deliberate, like a predator savoring the moment. No, it doesn't. It's just beginning. Suddenly, the cafe's door slammed open, letting in a gust of cold wind that rattled the windows. I spun around, heart leaping, but it was just a man stumbling in, eyes wild, muttering to himself. The tension snapped for a second, and Alex took advantage, reaching into his pocket. I froze. Not a tool. A small device, something flickering with light. I didn't recognize it, but I knew instantly what it was, a signal jammer. He wanted to cut off my connection, isolate me completely. No calls, no texts, no digital lifeline. Panic clawed at my chest. You won't get away with this. He stepped closer, voice low and steady. You're the one who's trapped. Remember that. My fingers trembled as I pulled out my phone, trying to send a quick text. But the screen blinked and died, dead battery, or maybe something worse. The lights flickered again, this time plunging us into near darkness. I could barely see his face, but I could feel the weight of him, the slow, deliberate closing of space between us. Why don't you just give up? He whispered. Let me tell your story. I shook my head, breath ragged. Not without a fight. He laughed softly, and the sound was like ice cracking. Good. Because I'm not done with you yet. The cafe around us seemed to close in, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee and something darker, resentment, obsession, a history I never wanted to revisit but had no choice but to face. And then, from the corner, a sudden movement caught my eye. A shadow slipping out the back door. Someone else. Watching. My mind spun. Was this a setup? An accomplice? Or a chance for me to escape? I didn't know. But I had to try. I moved toward the door, heart pounding, every nerve screaming to run. Alex stepped after me, calm, assured, like he'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. The cold night air hit me like a slap when I burst outside, and the distant hum of the city felt like a lifeline. Behind me, his voice cut through the darkness, low and threatening. You can't run from what's already inside you. I didn't look back. Not yet. But I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The morning sun poured through the slats of the blinds, casting thin stripes across the bedspread. I lay there, eyes tracing the patterns, ears tuned to the faint hum of the city waking up. My phone sat on the nightstand, silent for once. No notifications. No new messages. Just the quiet, like a lull before the storm settled, or maybe the storm finally passed. I didn't want to check it. Not yet. Not after last night. But the pull was magnetic, as if my entire nervous system was wired to that small screen. After what felt like an impossible minute, I reached out, fingertips trembling, and flipped the device on. The notifications were gone. The bizarre posts, the strange conversations I never had, the messages sent in my name, everything erased. It was as if the digital ghost that had haunted me for weeks had vanished overnight. But the silence was deafening. I stared at the blank screen, my chest tightening. Freedom? Or just a new kind of cage? I sat up, running my hands through my hair. The room smelled faintly of coffee, a scent that brought me back to a moment last week when I had sat alone in a cafe, trying to make sense of the chaos. The bitter taste lingered in my mouth now, dry and metallic, like the remnants of fear. For the first time in days, I left the apartment. The hallway smelled of old paint and damp carpet, the usual mix that felt oddly comforting. Outside, the city had a rhythm all its own, distant sirens, a dog barking somewhere down the street, the sharp clatter of a garbage truck starting its rounds. Life moved, indifferent to the mess I'd been dragged through. I walked to the corner coffee shop, the one with the chipped red door and the crooked sign. The bell chimed as I entered, and the barista gave me the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I nodded, ordered a black coffee, and sat down by the window, watching people pass, their faces a blur of stories I wouldn't know. The coffee was hot, bitter, and grounding. I sipped slowly, feeling the warmth spread through my fingers, the roughness of the ceramic cup against my skin. Outside, a woman with bright red boots stomped through a puddle, sending ripples that caught the sunlight. The world was messy and real. No filters. No manipulation. I pulled my laptop from my bag, hesitating before opening it. The screen blinked to life, the familiar glow illuminating my face. I logged into my accounts, half expecting to see the chaos return. But the posts were mine. The messages, too. No strange conversations. No ghostly puppeteer. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this calm was fragile, as if the eye of the storm had passed, but the tempest lingered just beyond the horizon. It was time to face the wreckage. I started with my closest friends. I sent a message to Hannah, the one person I trusted most. "Can we talk? I need to explain everything." Her reply came quickly, "Of course. I'm here." Relief was a slow burn, warming my chest. I typed out a long message, telling her everything, the strange posts, the fake conversations, the feeling of being trapped in someone else's script. I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't try to make it sound better. I just laid it all out. While waiting, I scrolled through the notifications, the comments, the messages. Some were angry. Some confused. Some downright cruel. I realized how much damage had been done, how many people I'd unintentionally hurt or alienated. The weight of it pressed down on me. Hannah called. Her voice was steady, calm, but there was an edge of sadness beneath. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," she said softly. "But you're not alone. We'll figure this out." We talked for hours, piecing together what we could, planning how to reclaim my digital life. She helped me set up new passwords, enabled two-factor authentication, and we reported the suspicious activity to the platforms. It felt like setting up fences around a burned-down house, small protections against something that had already scarred me. Later, I met with Mark, my brother. His skepticism was a shield, but beneath it, I caught the flicker of concern. He didn't say much, but his presence was enough. Sometimes, words fall short. Sometimes, just sitting silently together is the only way to heal. That night, back in my apartment, I stood by the window watching the city lights blink on. The air was cooler now, carrying the scent of rain and asphalt. I traced the outlines of the buildings, thinking about how close I'd come to losing not just my online identity, but pieces of myself. The digital world had felt like a trap, a mirror warped by someone else's hand. But through the chaos, I'd found cracks. Small spaces where my true self shone through, messy, flawed, but real. I realized I couldn't erase everything the intruder had done. Some scars would remain, etched into the fabric of my relationships, my reputation. But I could rebuild. Slowly. Deliberately. I closed the laptop and turned off the lights. Darkness settled around me like a soft blanket. Silence. Complete silence. I wasn't trapped anymore. I was free. And for the first time in weeks, I believed I could find my way back to who I was. The next morning, I deleted all my social media apps. No posts. No likes. No endless scroll. Just the real world, messy and unpredictable. And me, finally in control. Story 4, Silent Surveillance, Threat in the Mail. The mail slot clattered shut, and I nearly missed it. That was the first odd thing, the handwriting. It was too precise, too deliberate, like someone was trying too hard to be anonymous but couldn't quite let go of control. I tossed it on the counter without opening it, thinking maybe it was a flyer or some misdelivered bill. But the weight of it felt off, heavier than paper. Curious, I flicked the corner of the envelope open and pulled out a photograph. It was a picture of my neighbor's house, taken from across the street, the camera angle low, like someone had crouched behind a bush or crouched in the dark. The image was sharp, the kind of clarity you don't get from a quick phone snap. The curtains were drawn halfway, and I could see a vague silhouette moving inside. I blinked, my mouth dry. I didn't know much about my neighbors, just the usual hellos in passing, but this felt invasive, like a secret folded into my mailbox without warning. I told myself to toss it. It was probably a prank. But I didn't. I slid the photo into my desk drawer and went about my morning. The kettle whistled, steam swirling in the cold air of the kitchen, and outside, a dog barked somewhere down the lane. I tried to shake off the unease, but it lingered in the pit of my stomach, cold and persistent. 2 days later, another package arrived. This time, a small cardboard box, taped shut with brown packing tape. No return label again, just my name and address, but the handwriting was different, more jagged, hurried, like someone had scribbled it with their left hand. The heavier texture of the box made me hesitate before tearing it open. Inside was a USB drive resting on a bed of shredded newspaper. I didn't recognize the brand, and the metal was cold and smooth in my palm. Alongside it was a note, handwritten in elegant cursive, the ink smudged as if it had been written in a hurry. Watch carefully. You're already part of this. I stared at the note for so long that the edges curled toward me, like the paper was breathing. My fingers trembled when I plugged the USB into my laptop. The screen flickered, and then a folder appeared, filled with dozens of photos. They were of the same neighborhood, but not just my house or my neighbors. Every image showed someone's face, a car parked in a driveway, a glimpse of a backyard. People I passed every day, going about their lives unaware. Why was I getting this? Who was this for? The thought gnawed at me while I sat frozen, the glow of the screen reflecting off my glasses. I tried to tell myself it was some elaborate mistake, or maybe a photographer's odd project, but none of that made sense. Later that evening, I walked to the corner store under the street lamp's weak yellow glow. The night smelled like rain, fresh and clean, but also sharp, like the city was holding its breath. I kept checking over my shoulder, though no one was there. The grocery clerk gave me a quick nod, but his eyes seemed to linger a moment longer than usual. Back at home, the quiet settled around me like a thick blanket. The hum of the fridge, the ticking of the wall clock, the faint creak of the floorboards as the house settled, all of it combined into a steady rhythm that should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like a countdown. I tried to sleep, but my mind refused to stop spinning. What if these packages were warnings? Or threats? The thought made my hands go clammy against the cool sheets. I twisted the pillow into a tight knot, the scratchy fabric digging into my cheek, and stared at the ceiling where the paint was peeling near the corner, revealing rough plaster. Silence. Complete silence. When I checked the mailbox the next morning, there was nothing. No envelope. No box. Just the usual bills and flyers. For a moment, relief bloomed in my chest. Maybe it was over. I told myself that. But deep down, I knew better. I wasn't the only one getting these packages. I just didn't know who else was involved. And I had no idea what game I'd stumbled into or how far it would reach. Later that afternoon, as I sifted through the photos again, one detail struck me. The same figure appeared in the background, a shadowy presence lurking just out of focus, always in the periphery. Someone was watching. Always watching. The lines between curiosity and fear blurred in the twilight haze as I realized my quiet street had changed. It wasn't just a place where I came home to sleep anymore. It had become a stage, and I was an unwilling performer in something much darker than I cared to admit. I closed the laptop, the screen going black, the room, with its faint smell of dust and decay, falling into semi-darkness. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window panes like a whispered warning. I didn't want to look. But I did. And there, across the street, behind the curtain of my neighbor's window, a figure stood very still. Watching. My breath caught, heart pounding against my ribs like a frantic drum. The figure didn't move, didn't blink, a silent sentinel shrouded in shadow. I wanted to convince myself it was just a trick of the fading light, but deep down, I knew better. The night had just begun its dark performance. From the corner of my eye, the door creaked open, and Mrs. Langley stepped out onto her porch, clutching her knitting basket as if it were a shield. She peered across the street, her brow furrowed, lips pursed in a silent question. I opened my mouth to call out, but the words caught in my throat. She didn't seem to see the figure, at least, not yet. Behind me, the phone rang sharply, slicing through the heavy silence. I glanced toward the small kitchen, where Mark, my roommate, paused in the act of pouring himself a late-night cup of tea. His eyes flicked to the window, narrowing as he caught sight of the shadowed shape across the street. "Did you see that?" I whispered, stepping away from the window, pulling the curtain just a bit tighter. Mark shook his head slowly. "Probably just someone waiting for a cab. It's late." But his voice held a tremor of uncertainty. He turned back toward the kitchen, but I caught the way his hand lingered near the item block a moment longer than necessary. Suddenly, the figure moved just a fraction, a subtle shift that sent a chill racing down my spine. Mrs. Langley gasped, clutching the railing as she took a tentative step forward. "Who is that?" she demanded, voice shaking. I swallowed hard, my pulse hammering louder than the wind outside. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I think we need to find out. Before whatever this is decides to cross the street." The shadow across the street vanished just as quickly as it had appeared, swallowed by the night like it was never there. "Maybe we should call someone," Mrs. Langley muttered behind me, her voice barely above a whisper. She gripped the banister tightly, knuckles whitening. I shook my head. "No. Not yet. If this is someone watching us, calling the police might just make things worse." I hated how certain I sounded. I hated that I was so sure. Mark moved toward the kitchen sink, rinsing his cup with slow, deliberate movements. "Did you say anything about the packages?" he asked, voice low. I hesitated. "Yeah. I got another one today. Came for someone named Derek, apparently. No return address. Just strange stuff inside." He frowned. "Like what?" I swallowed hard, the taste of stale coffee suddenly thick on my tongue. Surveillance photos. Of neighbors. People on this block. And an encrypted flash drive. I haven't opened it yet. Mark's eyes narrowed. "Why would someone send that here? Are you sure they're meant for someone else?" I nodded, though the certainty was fraying at the edges. I've checked. No Derek here. No one with that name in the building. But the packages keep coming. Same handwriting on the labels. Always detailed photos. Always the flash drive. Mrs. Langley shivered, crossing her arms. Do you think it's some kind of blackmail? Like someone's trying to scare him? Maybe, I said. Or someone's trying to intimidate all of us by proxy. But who? And why me? Mark leaned against the counter, the fluorescent kitchen light casting harsh shadows under his eyes. Have you talked to the neighbors? Anyone notice anything weird? I shook my head. Not yet. I'm not even sure where to begin. The night pressed in around us, the street lamp outside flickering like a warning. I could hear a distant dog barking, a low, mournful sound that seemed to stretch on forever. The air smelled faintly of rain, damp and cold, creeping through the cracked window frame. I'm going to check the mailroom, Mark said suddenly. Maybe there's a clue there. I didn't argue. I was grateful for the distraction. He pulled on his jacket, the fabric rough against his skin, and slipped quietly out the door. I stayed behind, my fingers trailing over the rough plaster of the wall, trying to anchor myself. I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. The mailroom was colder than I expected, the overhead lights buzzing faintly as I flicked the switch on. Rows of pigeonholes lined the wall, each labeled with names and apartment numbers. I crouched down, rifling through the scattered junk mail and flyers, my heart thudding in my chest. There. A small, unmarked envelope tucked between the bills for 3B. I pulled it out carefully, the paper crisp and cold. No stamp, no return address. Just my name, written in the same precise script as the packages. Inside was a single photograph. It showed the front door of my apartment, the lock clearly visible. The picture was recent enough light to catch the reflection of the hallway behind me. Someone had been standing just out of sight. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. I stuffed the photo into my pocket and hurried back upstairs, the sound of my footsteps echoing sharply in the empty hallway. When I got back to the apartment, Mark was waiting, leaning against the doorframe with a grim look. I didn't find much, he said. But I did notice something odd in the lobby. The security camera facing the entrance, someone's been tampering with it. Wires pulled loose, maybe to disable the feed. The idea sent a shiver down my spine. So whoever this is, they're careful. They don't want to be caught on tape. Mark nodded. We need to be smarter than whoever's behind this. I pulled out the flash drive from the last package, turning it over in my palm. The metal was cool, smooth, and completely inscrutable. I glanced at Mark. Can you crack it? He gave a tight smile. I've got a few tricks. But if this is encrypted well, it might take some time. I bit my lip. Time was the one thing I didn't have. Later that night, after Mark had locked himself away with his laptop, I sat by the window, watching the street below. The city had settled into a hushed lull, but every so often a car passed, headlights slicing through the darkness like item. I could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant murmur of traffic, the faint rustling of wind in the trees. I tried to focus on something normal, something mundane, but my mind kept circling back to the photos, the packages, the nameless threat looming just beyond my door. A sudden knock made me jump. Heart pounding, I moved to the door and peered through the peephole. No one there. I stepped outside cautiously, the cool air washing over me, carrying the scent of damp concrete and distant rain. On the floor, a small slip of paper lay folded in half. I picked it up, unfolding the note with trembling fingers. The handwriting was the same again. Watch closely. You're already part of the game. The words felt like ice water poured down my spine. I couldn't tell if I wanted to run or stay, to fight or disappear. I slipped back inside, locking the door behind me, and stared at the note, the weight of it pressing down like a stone in my chest. What game? And how had I become a player without even knowing the rules? I sat on the edge of the couch, the note crumpled in my palm, its words still sharp against my skin. I wanted to shake off the dread, to convince myself this was some twisted prank. But the packages, those damned packages, had a way of pulling me deeper into a mess I didn't understand. Each one was a piece of a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. The photos, the USB drives, the note someone was watching. And worse, they'd already pulled me in, tangled me in their web without so much as a warning. The clock ticked loudly on the wall, each second echoing too loudly in the quiet. I glanced toward the door, half expecting it to creak open, to find some shadowy figure waiting. But nothing. Only the soft creak of the floorboards beneath the radiator. My hands trembled, fingers tightening around the paper until it crumpled further, tearing slightly. I needed to know who was behind this. To understand why me. But every instinct screamed that digging deeper might only make things worse. Still, I couldn't stop now. I was past the point of no return. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, the sky a dull sheet of steel. I woke with a dry throat and a pounding headache. The events of the night before swirled in my mind like a storm, refusing to settle. Coffee was the only thing that could cut through the fog. I stumbled into the kitchen, the bitter aroma filling the air as I poured a mug and took a long, shaky sip. I sat by the window, watching neighbors shuffle by with umbrellas, their faces blurred behind rain-streaked glass. It struck me how ordinary everything seemed. The dog barking somewhere down the street, the low murmur of a lawnmower starting up. Nothing about this neighborhood looked like the setting for some sinister game. But that was the thing, evil often wore a familiar face. I turned my attention to the latest package, the one that had arrived just before I found the note. It was heavier than the last, wrapped in plain brown paper, no markings. My pulse quickened as I peeled it open, careful not to tear the contents inside. Inside was a small manila envelope, thick and bulging. I slid out a stack of photographs, dozens of them, each one a snapshot of faces from around the block. There was Mr. Jenkins from next door, watering his begonias. Mrs. Patel walking her dog. The teenager from across the street skateboarding down the driveway. The photos were precise, almost clinical. Taken from odd angles, close enough to capture details but distant enough to suggest secrecy. I flipped through them, stomach twisting with unease. Why these people? What did they have to do with me? Then, tucked beneath the photos, a folded sheet of paper with a series of coordinates and times scribbled in a hurried hand. The dates were recent. The times suspiciously specific. The room felt colder. I shivered despite the warm morning sun trying to break through the curtains. My mind raced, piecing together what this meant. Someone was monitoring these people, tracking their movements. It wasn't random, this was surveillance, pure and simple. But why involve me? What did they expect me to do with this information? I reached for the USB drive next to the photos, the one that came with the last package. It was small, unassuming, but heavy with implication. I plugged it into my laptop, the screen flickering as it recognized the device. A folder popped up, encrypted with a password. I stared at it, unsure if I wanted to open that door. Curiosity won, as it often did. I tried the first password that came to mind, my own name, but it was denied. Then the note's chilling phrase, "Watch closely." I typed it in. The screen blinked, and the folder unlocked. Inside were video files, dozens of them. I clicked on the first. The footage was grainy but unmistakable, a camera angle from a streetlight, focused on a small cafe. Timestamp footage showing someone sitting alone at a table, nervously glancing over their shoulder. The person looked familiar. It took me a moment to realize it was me. I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled as I watched myself from a dozen feet away, unaware, vulnerable. The camera angle shifted to another location, my building's lobby, the stairwell, even the small park bench where I had sat 2 evenings ago. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was being watched constantly. Every move cataloged, recorded, analyzed. The weight of it crushed down hard. I leaned back, trying to steady my breathing, but my chest felt tight, almost as if the walls themselves were closing in. Then, a message popped up on the screen, text blinking in cold white letters. You can't hide. Every step you take is known. You're involved now. There's no turning back. I yanked the USB out, the plastic cold against my clammy fingers. The screen went dark. I stared at my reflection in the blackened monitor, the pale face staring back at me. Was I a victim, or a pawn? Or something worse, a threat? I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? Someone is watching me and sending me photos and encrypted files. It sounded absurd. Who would believe me? More importantly, who was this someone? I knew I couldn't just shut my door and pretend none of it was happening. The game was already inside my life, tangled in every corner of my routine. Work, sleep, even the simple act of walking to the corner store had become fraught with danger. I needed to talk to someone. Someone who might understand. But even then, I hesitated. Could I drag anyone else into this nightmare? Would it put them at risk too? That afternoon, I forced myself outside, the sky now a bruised purple as dusk settled. The air smelled faintly of wet asphalt and pine needles. I walked to the coffee shop down the street, the one with cracked windows and a bell that jingled loudly every time the door opened. Inside, the warm scent of roasted beans and cinnamon filled the air. I ordered a black coffee and sat at a corner table, watching people come and go. My eyes darted to the door every time it opened, expecting what exactly? A shadow? A warning? A sign that I was being followed? A barista with tired eyes and a crooked smile approached. You look like you could use a refill. Her voice was soft, a little hesitant. I nodded, and she poured another cup. You okay? She asked, glancing at the crumpled note sticking out of my pocket. I hesitated, then shook my head. Not really, I said, voice low. I'm dealing with something complicated. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. You're not the first. Strange things happening around here. I blinked. What do you mean? She glanced around before answering. Her words sent a fresh wave of unease through me. I wasn't alone. Whatever this was, it wasn't just aimed at me. It was bigger. More dangerous. When I left the coffee shop, the street was empty, the streetlights flickering in the early evening gloom. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, the damp chill seeping in. As I reached my building, a figure emerged from the shadows by the entrance. I froze, heart hammering. The silhouette didn't move, didn't speak. Just stood there, watching. I wanted to turn and run. To tell myself it was nothing. But I didn't. Because whatever game this was, I was already in it. And now I had no way out. The figure stepped forward, voice low and calm. You've seen enough to know there's no choice left. You're in deeper than you think. Stop looking for answers, because the next move belongs to us. The words settled over me like a shroud. The game wasn't just watching anymore. It was controlling. And I was trapped. She glanced around before answering. People get packages, too. Not all of them meant for them, though. Sometimes it's a message, sometimes a warning. Depends on who's sending. I blinked, weighing her words. The bell above the door jingled again, sharp and sudden, cutting through the low murmur of the cafe. I looked up, expecting what? A shadow? A sign? Nothing but a man in a wrinkled gray jacket, muttering into his phone as he slouched past. The ordinary felt suddenly dangerous. Who? I asked, voice softer than I intended. I saw her hesitate, then lean in, lowering her voice even more. People who want to remind you that you're not invisible. That they're watching. You might not even know what you've stumbled into yet. Her words settled over me like the cold night air slipping through a cracked window. I left a few coins on the chipped wood tabletop and stepped outside. The street was nearly empty. A distant dog barked, sharp and insistent, then silence. Complete silence. I walked back toward my apartment, the weight of the packages pressing against every step. Each unopened box was a secret I didn't want to know, but needed to understand. The photos of my neighbors' homes, the encrypted USBs, what was the end game here? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was a pawn in something much darker. When I got inside, the hallway felt colder than usual. The flickering fluorescent bulb above the elevator cast uneven shadows over the peeling paint. I pressed the button for my floor and waited, heart quickening despite the hum of the building settling around me. Upstairs, I slid the key into the lock. The door creaked open. Inside, the stale scent of dust and old paper wrapped around me like a shroud. I dropped the packages on the kitchen table and sat down, rubbing my hands over my face. One package lay open already, the one with the photos. I picked up a picture, the glossy surface cool beneath my fingers. The image was taken from across the street, a woman watering her plants, a man unloading groceries. Faces clear enough to recognize, but blurred around the edges, as if the photographer didn't want to be noticed. I flipped through a few more. The photos were relentless in their normalcy. No signs of struggle, no overt threats, just people going about their lives. But the way they were taken suggested something else entirely. Someone was watching. Someone who wanted to know everything. I grabbed one of the USB drives, turning it over in my hand. The plastic was smooth, unnervingly so. I hesitated. Plucking it in could be a trap, but ignoring it wasn't an option either. I needed answers. My laptop sat on the desk, waiting. I plugged the drive in, holding my breath. The screen flickered, then a folder appeared, instructions. The file inside was a text document, simple and chilling. You have what we want. Now, do as you're told. Your neighbors are watching you too. The words blurred before my eyes. My hands trembled. I closed the laptop quickly, a sour taste rising in my throat. The realization hit me like a slap. I wasn't just a bystander. I was part of their game. And the stakes were higher than I'd ever imagined. The phone buzzed on the counter. I jumped. The screen was blank, no caller ID, no message preview. I answered anyway. A voice, calm and low, filled the line. You're getting closer. Don't stop now. I swallowed hard. Who is this? Silence, then a click. I dropped the phone, heart pounding. The room felt suffocating, the walls closing in. I needed to breathe, to think. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window pane. The street lamp flickered, then steadied. I caught my reflection in the dark glass, eyes wide, unblinking. I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep this up. But one thing was clear, backing down wasn't an option anymore. Not with the lives of the people around me tangled in this web. And if they were watching me, then I had to watch back. The next morning, I woke up to a new package waiting by the door. No name. No return address. Just a plain brown box, heavier than the rest. Inside, a collection of old, faded photographs. These weren't neighbors, but places. Streets I'd walked 100 times without a second thought. But now, each image felt like a thread pulling me deeper into the darkness. On the bottom, a note in neat, deliberate handwriting. You're running out of time. Outside, the sky was gray, the air thick with the scent of rain. I stood at the window, watching the world move on as if none of this mattered. But it did. It mattered more than anything. And I was running out of time. The morning crept in slow and gray, like a bruise spreading across the sky. I sat at the kitchen table, the rough grain of the wood cutting into my palms. Outside, the rain tapped against the window pane, a quiet, relentless drum. The scent of wet asphalt and damp earth drifted in through the cracked window. It smelled like endings, but maybe beginnings, too. I stared at the pictures again, the streets I knew so well, corners I passed daily without a second thought, now skewed, sinister. Each photo was a frame from some unseen surveillance, like I was part of a film I hadn't auditioned for. I tried to piece it all together, but the puzzle was missing too many pieces. The phone rang, sharp and sudden, slicing through the silence. I jumped, the plastic handset cold and unforgiving in my hand. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Hello? My voice cracked. Silence. Then, a breath. Slow, deliberate. You don't have much time, the voice whispered, low and unyielding. Stop digging. Walk away. Or it gets worse. Click. The line went dead. I sat there, heart pounding, hands trembling. No name, no number. Just a threat cloaked in shadows. I wasn't sure whether to be furious or terrified. Probably both. Later that afternoon, I found myself wandering the streets in the rain, coat collar pulled high against the chill. The photographs haunted me with their silent accusations. I passed the places, familiar facades blurred by the rain, but the feeling of being watched settled deep in my bones. I looked over my shoulder too often, catching glimpses of movement at the edge of my vision. Shadows lengthened, but no one was there. I stopped at a corner cafe, shaking off the cold as the warmth wrapped around me like a fragile shield. The smell of coffee was strong, bitter, and grounding. I ordered a black cup, no sugar, bitter enough to match my mood. The barista, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, gave me a knowing look, like she saw the storm brewing behind mine. Rough morning, she asked quietly. I forced a smile. You could say that. She nodded, then leaned in. Sometimes, it's the quiet ones you've got to watch. I blinked. Excuse me? She shrugged. People don't always shout their secrets. Sometimes they whisper them in the spaces between words. Just be careful. I wanted to ask her more, but the moment passed. I paid and left, the rain greeting me again with cold hands. Back at my apartment, the sun was sinking beneath heavy clouds. The street lamp flickered, one of those lazy, uneven blinks I'd noticed before. I pulled the curtains aside and stared into the gathering dusk. Across the street, the windows of my neighbors glowed softly, their lives unknowingly tangled in this web. I thought about the photos, the encrypted USB drives, the whispered threats. How many of them were caught in this, too? Or worse, how many were the ones pulling the strings? I wasn't sure if I wanted to find out. The next day, I went to the police station, clutching the packages in my arms like evidence of a crime I hadn't fully understood. The officer I spoke with was polite but cautious, the kind of professional who's heard it all but trusts little. "Have you noticed anyone suspicious around your building? Anyone following you?" he asked, pen poised over his notebook. I shook my head. "Not exactly. But the packages, they're meant for someone else. I think I'm just a pawn." He frowned. "Do you want us to investigate?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm scared that whatever this is, it's bigger than me." He tapped the desk thoughtfully. "You did the right thing coming here. We'll look into it. But for now, keep your doors locked. Don't open packages you're not expecting." Leaving the station, I felt both relief and a deep, gnawing dread. The world didn't suddenly seem safer. If anything, the shadows had grown longer. That night, I barely slept. The apartment felt colder, the silence louder. Every creak and groan of the building sounded like a warning. I kept the last package in front of me, a small, unassuming envelope this time. Inside, a single sheet of paper, a list of names, including mine, and next to each, a date and a code I couldn't decipher. I ran my fingers over the paper, the ink smudging slightly beneath my touch. The list was a countdown. Time was slipping through my fingers like sand. Days passed. The packages stopped. The phone calls ceased. The immediate threat seemed to dissolve, leaving behind a hollow quiet. But the damage lingered, a slow poison. I found myself watching the neighbors differently now, every smile, every casual wave tinged with suspicion. I caught myself imagining what secrets lurked behind their doors. The surveillance photos had taught me to see the unseen, but that clarity came at a price. Trust was a fragile thing, easily shattered. I started keeping a journal, scribbling down every odd detail, every fleeting thought. It was a small anchor to reality, a way to hold myself together. Writing felt like a conversation with a version of me that still believed in normalcy. One evening, a knock at the door startled me. I froze. No packages had come in days. I peeked through the peephole. No one there. Just a single envelope slipped under the door. I hesitated, breath shallow, then picked it up. Inside was a photo of my apartment building, taken from across the street. But this time, someone was standing in the frame. Me. I swallowed hard. The note read, "You're not alone." I wanted to throw the envelope away, burn it, forget it ever existed. But I didn't. Not anymore. Because I knew the truth. The game hadn't ended. It had only changed players. Weeks turned into months. The packages never came back. The call stayed silent. But the echo of those threats lingered in every quiet moment, in every glance over my shoulder. I learned to live with the unease, the constant hum of vigilance just beneath my skin. I stopped looking out the window so much. I stopped expecting normal. I changed. I became someone who could see the cracks in the perfect facade of everyday life. Someone who knew that shadows weren't just absence of light, but places where stories were written, stories of fear, control, and survival. And maybe that was enough. One night, I stood by the window, the city spread out before me in a blur of lights and shadows. The rain had stopped. The air smelled clean, sharp with the promise of something new. I whispered to the dark, "I'm still here." No answer. Silence. Complete silence. But I was no longer afraid. Not really. Because now, I was watching back. Story 5, Desert Mirage Trap, Sun-Driven Hallucinations. The sun was a slow, unrelenting beast that morning. I'd driven out here with a plan, A simple one: scout the old mining road, check the map, maybe find a shortcut back to the highway. Nothing about the day hinted at trouble. My phone still had a sliver of signal when I left the last outpost, a dusty, forgotten gas station that smelled faintly of motor oil and old coffee. The clerk, an old man with sunburnt skin and a slow smile, had warned me about the heat. "It'll play tricks on you," he said, his voice dry as the landscape. I nodded, thinking he meant hallucinations or wild animals. I didn't realize then how literal he was. The truck's engine hummed low as I pressed on, the tires crunching over gravel and dry sand. There was something hypnotic about the way the horizon blurred, the heat waves shimmering like a bad painting that refused to dry. I kept telling myself to stay focused, to note the landmarks, the mile markers, the faded signs, but the desert had a way of folding in on itself, swallowing up the familiar until everything looked the same. By midday, the sun was a white eye staring straight down. Sweat rolled down my back in thin rivers, and my mouth felt like it had been stuffed with cotton balls. I tried to drink water, but the bottle was nearly empty. I'd misjudged how much I'd need. It was a rookie mistake, but at the time, it seemed manageable. I told myself I'd find shade soon, maybe a patch under a scraggly mesquite or behind one of the rock outcrops. I was wrong. The shadows were thin and fleeting. The land was a mirror, bright, empty, and without mercy. At some point, I noticed something strange, a flicker of blue in the distance, a glittering shimmer that looked nothing like the dusty browns and yellows of the desert. I stopped, wiped my brow, and squinted hard. It might have been a trick of the light, a heat mirage, but it looked like water. An oasis. I told myself it was water. I started walking toward it. The sand was hot and sharp beneath my boots, and the air smelled faintly of dust and something else, something sweet, almost like crushed herbs. I swallowed hard. The shimmering patch stayed just out of reach, dancing ahead as if mocking me. The closer I got, the more the image wavered, folding and folding again like a mirage that wouldn't stay still. I slowed, confusion twisting in my chest. It wasn't right. "Come on," I whispered, lips cracked and dry. Just a little closer. The shimmering spot vanished. Suddenly, the world was empty again. No water. No shade. Just sand and sun and a silence so dense it pressed against my ears. I blinked, and the desert seemed to breathe around me, hot air rippling in waves, the faint whistle of wind across the dunes. Somewhere, a bird called out, sharp and lonely. I paused, my hands trembling slightly. That's when I noticed the first real sign that something was off, my shadow. It flickered oddly, like it was struggling to keep up, stretching and contracting in ways I hadn't seen before. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it, or that the heat was playing tricks again. But the feeling didn't go away. I checked my watch. It was almost 2 in the afternoon. I'd been walking for hours, but the miles felt endless. The truck was nowhere in sight. The path I'd taken seemed to have melted away behind me, as if the desert was erasing its own tracks. I felt a tightening in my chest, a cold pinch that wasn't from the heat. "Maybe I took a wrong turn," I said aloud, though my voice sounded strange, dry and cracked in the empty air. "Maybe I just need to keep going." I tried to steady my breath, but it came in shallow bursts. My throat felt raw, and each swallow was like scraping sandpaper over my tongue. The water bottle in my hand was nearly empty. I shook it, hoping for a splash, a reminder that I wasn't alone. Nothing. I thought about calling for help, but the signal was gone. The last bars had flickered out hours ago, swallowed by the vastness. No one would hear me, not here. Only the wind, and maybe the distant call of a coyote or some other desert creature I didn't want to meet. I sat down on a sun-baked rock, trying to catch my breath. The heat radiated from every surface, making the air waver like a curtain. My skin prickled with sweat, and a dull headache pulsed behind my eyes. I rubbed my face, tasting the grit on my lips. That's when I saw it again, just a flicker at first, a glimpse of blue and green beyond the haze. The oasis. It was there, shimmering like a promise, tantalizing and cruel. I stood up, unsteady, and started moving toward it again. The closer I got, the more real it felt. I could almost hear the soft trickle of water, the rustle of palm leaves. My mind clung to the sound like a lifeline. But whenever I reached out, the image melted away. The ground beneath my feet was just dry sand and rock. My heart hammered, and I blinked until tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. I stopped. "It can't be real," I muttered. "It can't." But my body kept moving, drawn forward by something I didn't understand. The sun beat down, relentless and unforgiving. I tasted dust and desperation on my tongue. The desert was no longer just a place, it was a challenge, a test. And I was losing. I didn't know it yet, but the real danger wasn't out here, hiding behind rocks or waiting in the shadows. It was inside me, in the way the heat twisted my senses, in the slow unraveling of my mind. The desert was patient. It waited for me to falter, to surrender. And I was already halfway there. The sun hadn't relented by the time I stopped moving, exhaustion pulling every muscle tight, like a wire stretched to snapping. I sank down, back against a warm rock, and tried to steady my breath. It felt wrong to rest, but my legs trembled beneath me. The desert was a cruel teacher, and I was already failing the lesson. I pulled out the small notebook I found in my backpack, the one with half-scribbled maps and notes I'd been keeping since I realized I was off course. The pages were starting to stick together from sweat, the ink smudged, but the little sketches gave me something to hold on to, some thread of order in the chaos. I traced a shaky line from where I thought I'd been this morning to where I was now. If I kept walking east, maybe I'd find something real. Not a mirage. Something solid. A person. A sign. Water. The sun dropped lower, casting long, twisted shadows. The air cooled just enough to bring a fleeting relief, but the desert silence pressed down harder. No birds, no insects, nothing but the distant groan of the wind sweeping across sand and stone. It was a sound that felt alive, like the desert itself was breathing, watching. I rubbed my forehead, trying to shake the fog that was settling in. I needed to think clearly, but every step forward felt like walking through molasses. My muscles ached, my lips cracked and bled a little when I pressed my tongue against them. Salt and dryness coated my mouth, and I could almost taste old sweat, bitter and stale. Then, just as I was about to shove the notebook back into my pack, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, a flicker near a distant rock formation. Something shifted, a shadow that didn't quite belong. I squinted, heart tightening. Was it a person? Or just another trick of the light? "Hello?" My voice cracked, dry and hoarse. I coughed, the sound rough against the quiet. "Is someone there?" No answer. Only the wind, swirling dust. I forced myself to stand, swaying unsteadily. The figure, or maybe a pile of discarded clothes, remained still. I took a few steps closer, then stopped. My mind jumped to the worst-case scenarios. Someone lost like me, maybe worse off. Or maybe not lost at all. I remembered the faint sound I thought I heard earlier, that trickle of water. It had to be real, right? I wiped sweat from my brow and started moving toward the rock formation, eyes scanning every inch, every shadow. The rocks felt rough against my fingertips as I brushed past them, sun-warmed and jagged. The air smelled faintly of dry earth and something else, metal, maybe? Or rust. I couldn't tell. My chest tightened again, breath shallow and quick. Then I saw it. A small, half-buried container, plastic, battered, and empty. No water. Just an empty shell. My stomach sank. Someone had been here. Someone like me. And they'd left this behind. I sank down again, heart hammering with a strange mix of hope and despair. If someone else had been here, maybe they'd left clues. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. I dug through the sand near the container, fingers numb and trembling. There was something else, a crumpled piece of paper, brittle and faded. I unfolded it carefully, the edges sharp against my skin. It was a note, scrawled in a hurried hand. Don't trust a mirage. It's not what it seems. Keep moving. Find shade before night. The words hit me like a slap. Not just a warning, but a puzzle. A message from another person, maybe someone who'd been caught in the same trap. I stared at the scribbled letters, the ink smudged and blurred. My mind bounced between relief and panic. If someone else was out here, they might still be nearby, or they might be gone, lost to the desert or worse. Keep moving, I whispered. The desert wind seemed to carry the words away, scattering them like dust. The sky darkened faster than I expected, the horizon bleeding into deep purples and bruised oranges. I tucked the note into my pocket and looked around for shelter. There were no trees here, no caves, just more rocks and endless sand. I noticed a narrow crevice between two boulders, just big enough to crawl into. It wasn't much, but it offered shade. I crawled inside, the stone cool against my skin, a brief relief from the sun's brutal glare. As I settled in, the silence pressed back in, thicker now. My mind refused to rest, spinning images and memories like a broken film reel. I thought about the note, the empty container, and the shimmering oasis that kept slipping away like smoke. Was it a cruel joke, some trick of my dehydrated brain? Or was there something more, something I wasn't ready to face? The desert had already started to unravel me. I could feel it in the prickling in my skin, the tremor in my hands, the way my thoughts tangled and frayed. Sleep teased me, but I fought it, knowing that if I let go, I might not wake up. I kept turning the note over in my fingers, the faint smell of dust and ink rising from the paper. A reminder that I wasn't alone. Not entirely. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying a distant sound. A low murmur, almost like voices. I froze, heart pounding. My eyes darted to the entrance of the crevice. Maybe it was the desert playing tricks again. Or maybe someone was coming. I held my breath, listening. The night was alive now, not with stars or peace, but with something waiting. Something patient. And I was still halfway there. The voices didn't come closer. I forced myself to stand, legs weak and trembling, the rough stone cutting into my palms where I had grabbed the edge to steady myself. My throat was raw, and the taste of stale saliva stuck to the back of my tongue. I swallowed hard, trying to push down the nausea that had started creeping in. The desert was no longer just a place. It was a presence, a slow, grinding weight pressing in on me from every direction. I glanced up at the sky, pale and merciless even though it was just past midnight. Stars blinked coldly, indifferent. No moon. No mercy. The note's message replayed in my mind, the words a crooked map leading me somewhere I hadn't agreed to go. Follow the shimmer, it said. Find the water, or you won't survive the sun. The words had seemed like hope at first. Now they felt like a summons. I stuffed the note into my pocket and stepped out from the crevice into the open desert, the sand cool beneath my boots but the air already drying the inside of my mouth. I had to keep moving. Staying still meant drowning in my own thoughts, and that was a slow death. Ahead, the faint glow of the Mirage flickered again. It danced like a restless flame, just beyond reach. I swallowed hard, eyes fixed on that shimmering promise. The oasis was a trick, I knew that. Like the heat waves that rippled off the sand or the distant shapes that twisted into impossible forms when the sun was too high. But the idea of water, real water, was enough to pull me forward. Step by step, I followed. The ground beneath me shifted suddenly, looser sand giving way with a crunch. I caught myself, heart pounding. I wasn't just chasing a mirage anymore. There was something else here. Something that made the desert feel less empty. I thought about the voices again. Not just voices, but a murmur. A conversation. Or maybe one-sided. Maybe someone or something was waiting for me. I stopped, breathing ragged, and scanned the horizon. No one. No tents. No footprints. Only the desert stretching out like a frozen sea. But then I noticed it, a faint glint, not the usual shimmer of heat, but something metallic, buried in the sand near a cluster of rocks. I edged closer, curiosity outweighing caution. The sun was already rising now, the first pale blush creeping over the dunes. My shadow stretched long and thin behind me. The object was a rusted canteen, half buried, dented and empty. I picked it up, feeling the rough metal bite into my palm. No water. Just another lie left behind. I sat down heavily, the weight of the canteen anchoring me to the spot. The desert's silence pressed in again, thick and suffocating. I could taste the dust on my lips, and my skin prickled as sweat dried into salt. Then I heard it, the faintest scrape at the edge of my hearing. Not wind. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. I froze, heart thudding so loud it drowned out everything else. Hello? My voice cracked, brittle as dry wood. No reply. Only the sand shifting. I stood, searching. There, between two dunes, a figure. Thin, wrapped in faded cloth, face hidden beneath a scarf. Watching. Someone else. Someone who had followed the same path. Or maybe been here all along. My mind raced. Was this person friend or foe? Had they left a note? Was the oasis real for them? Did they know a way out? Are you lost? I called again, trying to sound steady. The figure didn't move. Instead, a low chuckle echoed in the still air. Not warm. Not friendly. Just a breath of sound that sent a shiver skittering down my spine. I took a step back. The desert suddenly felt too small. Too tight. The oasis, the note, the shimmering water, I wasn't chasing hope anymore. I was running towards something far more dangerous. The figure moved then, slow and sure, like a shadow slipping across the sand. I tried to turn, but something snagged my ankle. I looked down a thin vine, twisted and brittle, half buried in the sand but strong enough to trip me. I stumbled, arms flailing. The figure was closer now, silent but certain. My breath hitched, and the taste of dust and fear filled my mouth. Wait, I gasped, hands raised. I don't want trouble. The scarf shifted, revealing a pair of eyes sharp and wary. Neither do I, came the voice, rough and cautious. But the desert doesn't forgive mistakes. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I'm just trying to find water. The figure glanced toward the horizon, then back at me. Water, they echoed. A fool's prize. You don't know what you're chasing. I have to, I said, voice firmer than I felt. I can't stop now. A long silence stretched between us, the desert holding its breath. Then the figure crouched and pulled something from their pack, a small, cracked bottle. This is all I have, they said, holding it out. I hesitated but took it, feeling the cool glass against my palm. A few drops of liquid, barely enough to wet my lips, but enough to keep going. Who left the note? I asked, eyes fixed on them. They shrugged. Someone who wanted you to follow. Or maybe to die trying. Something about the words hit me harder than the sun. The desert wasn't just a place of heat and sand. It was a trap. And I had stepped right into it. The mirage shimmered again in the distance, more vivid now, almost real. I wanted to run, to chase that promise like a drowning man reaching for air. But the figures shook their head. That oasis isn't real. It never was. I blinked, confusion twisting my insides. Then why? It's a lure, they said. A game played by those who know the desert's secrets. They use the mirage to dry you out, to strip you down to nothing. And when you're broken... I swallowed hard, the weight of what they were saying sinking in. There's no going back. No second chances. The sun was climbing higher, the heat relentless now. I looked at the cracked bottle, then at the figure. We were both prisoners here, caught between thirst and something darker. I clenched my jaws. Then I guess I have to keep moving. The figure nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of the point of no return. As they turned away, disappearing into the shimmering heat, I realized the truth. The desert wasn't just unraveling my body. It was unraveling my mind, and whoever had left that note, whoever was watching behind the veil of dust and sun, they wanted me to unravel completely. I took a deep breath, tasting the salt on my lips, and stepped forward into the blinding light. The oasis flickered again, just beyond reach. And I had no choice but to follow. The sun was a cruel overseer, hammering down without mercy. I swallowed. My throat burned with a dry, sharp pain, the kind that clawed at your insides. The cracked bottle in my hand was empty, my last hope of salvation reduced to a fragile relic. I shifted my weight, the sand crunching underfoot like broken glass. Keep moving, I told myself, but the words felt hollow, like a whisper lost in a storm. The desert wasn't just a landscape anymore. It was a trap. A slow, insidious enemy that fed on my exhaustion, my fear, the thin threads holding my mind together. I could hear the buzz of flies somewhere, distant but maddeningly close, their relentless drone threading through the silence. The heat radiated off the ground in waves, blurring the edges of reality. I forced myself to take a few more steps toward the oasis, but the shimmering water receded, melting back into the heat haze. Stop it, I muttered, the sound dry and cracked. My voice felt foreign, like I was hearing someone else speak. The ground beneath me quivered with the weight of the sun, the air, cold and heavy with silence thick with the scent of dust and something faintly metallic, maybe the taste of rust or blood in the wind. I collapsed to my knees, hands digging into the sand, fingers trembling. My mind was a jumble of fragmented thoughts, half-drowned memories, and strange, dizzying flashes. Was I hallucinating? No, the figure, the note, the warning, they were real. But what had I stumbled into? The desert's secrets were darker than I imagined, and now I was tangled in them. A sudden noise yanked me back, soft, deliberate footsteps crunching on sand, too measured to be an animal, too close to be distant. My heart slammed against my ribs like a trapped bird. I scrambled upright, eyes scanning the shimmering horizon. Who's there? My voice cracked, brittle as dry twigs. No answer. Just the shifting heat and a faint rustle, like cloth brushing against skin. I squinted, trying to make out a shape, but the sun played tricks, stretching shadows into monsters. Then, out of the wavering air, a figure emerged, no longer a ghost but a person. Male, I thought, but the heat had melted certainty. He walked with a steady gait, and there was something in his eyes, sharp, calculating, not the empathy I had hoped for. Lost? His voice was low, steady, but there was an edge, like a warning. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Yes. I'm trying to find water. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. So are we all. He moved closer, the heat radiating from him like a second sun. The desert doesn't give. It takes. And those who know it best, well, they don't mind taking a little more. I blinked, a cold shiver darting through my sweat-soaked skin. Who are you? He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Just someone who's been here longer than you. You should be careful who you trust out here. He paused, shading his eyes against the glare. That oasis you're chasing? It's not what it seems. It's a lure. A trap. People come here looking for salvation and end up something else. Something else. The words echoed in my mind, twisting the insides of my chest. Why are you telling me this? Because you're close to the edge. I can see it in your eyes. He crouched, reaching into his pack, pulling out a small canteen, half full and grimy. Here. Drink. I hesitated. My instinct screamed no. But the dryness in my mouth was a desert of its own. I took the canteen, the cold metal slick against my palm. The water was warm, almost stale, but I drank greedily, every swallow a small salvation. Thanks, I whispered. He nodded. Don't thank me yet. The sun sank lower, casting long, distorted shadows over the dunes. The oasis shimmered again, closer this time, but still just out of reach. The man stood, brushing sand off his pants. You'll have to decide soon. Keep chasing the Mirage, or find a way out of this hell. I blinked, trying to steady my gaze. Why are you here? What do you want? He stepped back into the heat's distortion. I want to survive. Same as you. And then he was gone, absorbed by the desert's glare, leaving me with the echo of his words and a sudden, crushing loneliness. The oasis flickered, a cruel beacon on the horizon, mocking my every step. I staggered forward, each breath a struggle, the line between reality and illusion slipping with every heartbeat. The desert wasn't just breaking me physically. It was gnawing at the edges of my mind, pulling me toward a darkness I couldn't fight. The sun dipped below the dunes, and the temperature dropped like an item. Night was coming, and with it, a cold so sharp it threatened to freeze my very thoughts. The oasis disappeared in the twilight, replaced by shadows that stretched like fingers. I sank to the ground, shivering despite the heat of the day still lingering in my skin. The stars blinked cold and distant, indifferent to my suffering. Somewhere, a coyote howled, a lonely sound that felt like a warning. I closed my eyes and tried to remember why I kept moving. Because if I stopped, if I surrendered, whatever waited in the dark would find me. And I wasn't ready to meet it yet. I forced myself to rise, every step heavier than the last, but the desert. The sun was a cruel overseer, relentless and unforgiving, burning through what little hope I had left. I didn't know how long I'd been walking, hours. Days? My mind was a messy collage of heat and thirst, memories slipping like grains of sand through fingers too weak to grasp them. The shimmering oasis, that cruel trick of light and longing, had teased me again. I stumbled toward it, the ground beneath my boots radiating heat, mirages folding and bending in the distance like a cruel, mirthless dance. I collapsed on a rock, my hands trembling as I pressed my forehead against the coarse surface, tasting the grit on my cracked lips. The taste of dust was everywhere, thick in the air, clinging to my tongue. I tried to remember what water tasted like. Not the faint, chalky swill I trickled from my bottle hours earlier, but real water, cool, clean, life. I closed my eyes, willing the illusion to become real, willing the oasis to be more than a fleeting shimmer. A voice broke the silence, ragged and hoarse. Hey! Hey, you! My eyes snapped open. I wasn't alone. A man stood some distance away, his figure blurred by the heat haze but unmistakably human. He shaded his eyes with one hand, the other gripping the strap of a weathered backpack. His skin was sunburned, cracked like the earth beneath us, and the dirt on his face looked as deep as the lines in his worn shirt. I didn't know whether to trust him. Water, I croaked. Do you have water? He shook his head slowly, then raised a hand in a gesture that was half apology, half caution. Not much. You shouldn't be out here alone. I wanted to ask him who he was, where he'd come from, but my throat was too dry for words. Instead, I tried to stand, legs weak beneath me. He moved closer, steadying me with a rough hand on my elbow. His grip was firm but not unkind. What's your name? I managed. Simon. His voice was low, gravelly, like sandpaper rubbing a board. You? Does it matter? I said, bitterness lacing my tone. I didn't mean it, not really. He gave a short laugh, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. Maybe not. But names help keep us human out here. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I still remembered what that meant. The sun was setting, painting the sky in bruised purples and fiery oranges that seemed too loud for the silence of the desert. Shadows stretched long and cold, threatening the night. Simon rummaged through his pack and pulled out a small canteen. He unscrewed it and held it out. Here. Take it. I grabbed it, the metal cool against my palm. The water inside was lukewarm, but it was water. My hand shook as I brought the canteen to my lips and drank deeply. The dryness in my mouth eased, but the relief was brief, replaced by a sinking exhaustion that pulled at my bones. Why are you here? I asked once I caught my breath. Simon shrugged. Lost, like you. I was part of a group, had a plan, a map. But things went sideways. People panic out here. Made mistakes. I studied his face, trying to find the truth in the lines and sweat. There was something raw in his eyes, a flicker of fear and regret that mirrored my own. Did you see the others? The group? No. They scattered. I'm the last one. His voice cracked on the last word. The irony wasn't lost on me. Two lost souls thrown together by chance or by some cruel twist of fate. We sat in silence, the desert around us humming with the sounds of night, distant insects, the occasional rustle of dry brush. The temperature dropped sharply, cold biting at my skin despite the lingering heat. I thought I was losing my mind, I confessed, voice barely above a whisper. Chasing those illusions. That oasis. It kept slipping away. Simon nodded. Your mind tries to protect you. Makes you see what you need, even if it's not real. I swallowed hard, the weight of my own unraveling pressing down like a stone. I was ready to give up. Me too. He looked away, staring at the horizon where the last light bled out. But here we are. We shared what little food we had, a few stale crackers and a handful of nuts. The taste was dry and bland, but it grounded me. I realized then that survival wasn't just about water or shelter. It was about holding on to the fragments of yourself that made you more than just a body under the sun. The night deepened. Stars emerged like pinpricks of cold light, indifferent witnesses to our struggle. I listened to Simon's breathing, felt the roughness of his shirt against my fingertips. The desert was vast and merciless, but in that moment it felt smaller, somehow. Do you think we'll make it? I asked him, voice fragile. Simon shrugged again, a small smile breaking through. I don't know. But if we stick together, maybe we have a chance. I wanted to believe him. More than that, I needed to. Morning came with a pale light that seeped into the horizon. The heat was already climbing, but the promise of a new day stirred something in me. Simon and I stood, shoulders squared against the sun, the desert stretching endlessly ahead. We didn't speak much as we moved, but the silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the faint pulse of hope, fragile but real. Hours later, when the sun was at its height and the shimmer returned, I didn't chase it. I watched as the mirage flickered and vanished, a reminder of the fine line between hope and delusion, between survival and surrender. We found a dirt road, a faint ribbon cutting through the wilderness. The sound of an engine reached us, distant but unmistakable. Simon waved, and the vehicle slowed. The driver, a woman in a dusty hat, looked surprised but nodded sharply. You're lucky we found you. As we climbed in, I felt the weight of the desert fall away, replaced by a quiet reckoning. The ordeal had changed me. I wasn't the person who had stumbled into that vast, empty hell chasing illusions. I was someone who had stared into the void and found something stronger. The water tasted sweet when I finally drank deep again, and the hum of the engine was a lullaby. I didn't speak much on the ride back, but inside, I was saying a silent goodbye to the desert, its merciless sun, its shimmering lies, and its brutal truths. I wasn't lost anymore. Not really. And maybe that was enough. Story 6, Digital Doppelgänger, Hijacked Identity Unveiled. I woke to the faint hum of the city outside my window, the kind of dull, constant noise that almost disappears if you listen long enough. Nothing unusual there. A handful of messages, mostly routine, waiting for me. But when I swiped through my email, a flicker of something off caught my attention. There was an email sent from my own address to someone I didn't recognize. The subject line was simple: let's connect. I blinked, fingers hovering over the screen. I didn't remember sending it. The message was brief, almost friendly, but oddly formal. Looking forward to collaborating on the upcoming project. Please confirm receipt. The recipient was a colleague at the firm I worked for, but someone I'd never met or even heard of. I frowned, scrolling through my inbox in a growing haze of confusion. There were more messages I supposedly sent over the last few days, all addressed to names I didn't know, each one polite, professional, but completely out of character. I sat back, the chair creaking beneath me, tasting the bitter tang of unease. My mouth went dry. How could this be? I knew my email password like the back of my hand. I changed it last month, carefully. No one else had access to my devices. Or so I thought. The apartment felt colder all of a sudden, the walls closer than before, the faint buzzing of the overhead light turning into a low, persistent drone. I glanced at the clock. 6:17 a.m. too early for anyone to be at work, yet here I was, staring at a digital version of myself I didn't recognize. I tried calling IT, but the line was busy. Maybe a glitch, a mistake. I told myself to breathe, to slow down. But my hands trembled slightly as I tapped out a message to my manager, asking if she'd seen anything strange from my accounts. No reply yet. The morning dragged on in a haze of mild panic disguised as calm. I showered, dressed in the same muted tones I always wore, the fabric rough against my skin, grounding me. The smell of shampoo, crisp and clean, filled the air. I avoided mirrors, not ready to face the reflection of someone who might be losing control of their own life. On the train, the usual drone of conversation and clattering wheels seemed distant. The air smelled faintly of damp coats and stale coffee, the heat from the crowded car prickling at my neck. I checked my phone again. There was a new email. This time, it was a meeting request from a name I had never seen, sent from my own account. I showed it to the person sitting next to me, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a kind smile. "Does this look normal?" I asked. She squinted. "No idea. Maybe a mix-up? Sounds like someone's playing a joke." I nodded, but didn't laugh. The joke felt too cold, too deliberate. At the office, the fluorescent lights and the steady tapping of keyboards filled the air. My desk was the same as always, cluttered with notes and empty coffee cups. But when I logged into my computer, the screen blinked oddly for a second before settling on my inbox. There it was again. Another message sent from me, to someone on the other side of the building I'd never met. The words felt like a stranger's handwriting on my skin, familiar but wrong. "Hey, you okay?" a voice said, jolting me. It was Mark, from accounting, leaning against the cubicle wall. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile. "Just a weird email thing. Probably a glitch." He didn't seem convinced. "Maybe your account's been hacked. You should get IT on it." "I'm trying," I said, though the words felt hollow. The day wore on with an undercurrent of tension I couldn't shake. Every ping of my phone made my stomach twist. Was I losing my grip? Or was something else creeping in, slow and deliberate? I noticed the flickering light above my desk again, the way it stuttered like a heartbeat out of rhythm. Outside, the sky had turned a dull, oppressive gray, the air thick and still, as if the city itself was holding its breath. A dog barked somewhere distant, sharp and sudden, breaking the silence. In the late afternoon, an email popped up that wasn't from me. It was a reply to one of the messages supposedly sent from my address. The wording was strange, too careful, almost clinical. "Please confirm your availability. This is urgent." No signature. No explanation. I stared at the screen, fingers frozen above the keyboard. Who was pulling the strings? And why was my voice being used to speak for someone else? The office emptied slowly, my cubicle bathed in the weak orange glow of the setting sun. I packed my bag, the fabric of my jacket rough and familiar, and headed out into the cool evening air. The city smelled different now, less like coffee and concrete, more like wet pavement and distant smoke. As I walked, my phone buzzed again. Another message from me. Another stranger on the other end. Silence. Complete silence. I stopped, heart thudding in my ears, and looked around. No one was watching. No one followed. The streets were empty save for a few late commuters hurrying home. I slid my hands into my pockets, the leather rough beneath my fingers, and forced myself to keep moving. Because I didn't know who was behind this. But they knew me. And that was the worst part. The city had fallen into a quiet hum by the time I got home. I hadn't even unlocked the door before my phone buzzed again. Same number. Same sender, me. I stared, fingertips trembling as I fumbled to answer. The screen lit up with one simple line. "Did you check?" "Check what?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry. There was no signature, no clue beyond the chilling familiarity of my own digital voice. The room smelled faintly of damp wood and the faint trace of leftover dinner. I could hear the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the mechanical drone of strange comfort in the otherwise unnerving silence. I didn't reply. Instead, I sat down at my desk and booted up my laptop, fingers moving on their own toward the email client. If someone was sending messages from my accounts, I needed to know how deep this went. The inbox was mostly normal, except for one thread flagged as read that I couldn't remember opening. It was a conversation between me and a woman named Claire, someone I'd never met or heard of before tonight. The subject line was just a string of numbers. The emails were short, cryptic. Meeting at 10, one said. Confirmed. Bring the files. Files? What files? I scrolled down, the messages growing more frequent over the past 2 weeks. I hadn't sent any of them, or at least, I didn't remember doing so. My pulse quickened, and I pinched the bridge of my nose, tasting the bitterness of rising panic. Could I have been hacked? Maybe. But why target me? And more importantly, why involve people I'd never met? I opened a new tab and started digging through my company's directory. Claire's name popped up, but only as a contractor in a department I didn't work with. No photo, no phone number. Just a ghost in the system. I tried calling the number listed, but it rang out, no voicemail, no pickup. The line was dead. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. The phone buzzed again, jolting me out of my thoughts. Another message from me, this time a link to a file-sharing site. The link led to a folder labeled with my name and date of birth. Inside, documents I hadn't created, spreadsheets, contact lists, even scanned copies of my ID. I swallowed hard. This wasn't just identity theft. It was something more systematic, an erasure and rewriting of who I was. I needed help. But who could I trust? My hands shook as I dialed my closest colleague, Marissa, someone I'd worked with for years. The phone rang twice before she picked up, her voice bright but tired. Hey, it's late. Everything okay? I think someone's messing with me, I blurted out. My accounts. Emails. Messages. I'm not sure how, but someone's using my identity. There was a pause. Then, what do you mean? Like hacking? Yeah, but worse. They're sending messages from me to people I don't know, arranging meetings, sharing files I didn't make. I don't know who's behind it. My voice cracked. I'm scared, Marissa. She sighed, a sound that felt like a breath through the phone line. Okay. Don't freak out. Let me come over. We'll figure this out. Relief washed over me like a sudden downpour. Thanks. I'll be here. The waiting was unbearable. I tried to keep busy but kept glancing at the door, half expecting to see someone watching from the shadows. The rain tapped relentlessly against the window, a steady reminder that the night wasn't going to let me go easily. When Marissa arrived, she brought a calmness I hadn't realized I needed. Her eyes were sharp, scanning the room and then settling on my anxious face. Show me everything, she said, pulling out her own laptop. Together, we dove into the mess. Marissa's fingers flew over the keyboard, pulling up logs, account access times, IP addresses. The trail was messy but chillingly deliberate. The messages were sent from multiple locations, none matching my usual spots. Someone had built a network, weaving my identity into a web that stretched beyond the city. Each login was a thread, each message a stitch. We're not just looking at one hacker, she said quietly. This is coordinated. I nodded, the room suddenly feeling too small, too claustrophobic. But why me? What could they possibly want? Marissa frowned, her eyes narrowing at the screen. Look at this. She pulled up a file I hadn't noticed before, a spreadsheet titled Project Echo. It was filled with names, dates, and strange annotations. And at the bottom, my name appeared again. Next to it, a date, 2 days from now. Is this a deadline? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Maybe. Or a meeting. Whatever it is, it's coming. The idea that someone was watching my calendar, planning events in my name, felt like a suffocating weight pressing on my chest. I rubbed my hands over my face, feeling the rough stubble beneath my palms. The room smelled faintly of rain and the faint, metallic scent of the laptop's cooling fan. Outside, a distant siren wailed, cutting through the night. Marissa looked up. We need to find out who's behind this before it's too late. And we have to be careful. Whoever this is, they're smart. I nodded, but my mind refused to settle. I thought about the messages, faceless people pulling strings, using me as a puppet, twisting my identity into something unrecognizable. The idea made my skin crawl. Do you think it's someone at the company? I asked. Could be, she said. Or someone with access to your accounts. Maybe someone you've trusted. I swallowed, the thought bitter. Trust had always been a fragile thing. Now, it felt like a trap. We spent hours combing through data, piecing together a puzzle that refused to fit neatly. The deeper we dug, the more the picture blurred. But one thing was clear, I was no longer the observer. I'd been pulled into something bigger, something that wanted to control not just my messages, but me. Near dawn, exhaustion settling in, I glanced at my phone again. Another message blinked on the screen. From me. Just 2 words. Look outside. I stood frozen, the cold air from the open window brushing against my neck. Outside, the street was drenched, empty except for a single figure standing beneath the flickering street lamp. The rain glistened on the asphalt, and the shadow shifted, faceless and still. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know what they wanted. But I knew this was only the beginning. The figure didn't move. Then the message buzzed again. This time, 3 words, come outside now. I swallowed hard, my fingers trembling against the cold metal of the phone. The rain picked up, tapping a nervous rhythm on the glass. The street lamp flickered again, casting the figure in a brief wash of yellow before plunging them back into darkness. I could smell the wet concrete, faintly sour, mixed with the sharp, earthy scent of rain. The night air was too cold for this kind of invitation. Too deliberate. I slipped on my coat, the fabric rough against my skin, and locked the door behind me. The hallway was eerily quiet, the buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead humming just loud enough to remind me I wasn't alone. I moved fast, almost stumbling down the stairs, my footsteps echoing off the bare walls. Outside, the rain was heavier, soaking through the collar of my coat before I even reached the curb. The figure didn't flinch as I approached. No greeting. No wave. Just that unsettling stillness, like they were waiting for me to cross some invisible line. My mind scrambled for reasons why I'd be summoned here by a message sent from my own phone to meet a stranger who might as well have been a ghost. Who are you? I said, voice barely above a whisper, sharp with cold and confusion. No answer. Just the sound of rain falling, relentless and cold. I took a step closer, and the figure finally moved. Slowly. Purposefully. Hands shoved into pockets, head tilted down. The street lamp flickered again, revealing nothing but a dark jacket and nondescript sneakers. No face. No name. Look, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, if this is some kind of joke. The figure interrupted, voice low, almost mechanical. You don't know what you're dealing with. A shiver ran down my spine. Not from the cold, but from the weight of those words. I blinked, trying to clear the sudden fog of panic creeping in. Who sent the messages? Why me? They took a step back, disappearing into the shadows under the next street lamp, just out of reach. It's already too late. You're part of it now. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Part of what? The web. The network pulling my strings? I swallowed hard, the metallic taste of fear rising in my throat. Look, whoever you are, I don't want this. I want to fix it. My voice cracked with urgency. I don't even know what's happening. The figure hesitated, then spoke again, softer this time. There's no fixing. Not anymore. That was when I noticed the phone in their hand, my phone. Screen cracked, but unmistakably mine. Where did you get that? I demanded, stepping back, heart hammering so loud I thought it might burst through my ribs. They didn't answer. Instead, they turned and walked deeper into the night, swallowed by the rain and darkness like a bad dream fading at dawn. I stood there, drenched and shaking, the cold seeping through my jacket into my bones. The street lamp flickered one last time, then steadied. Silence. Complete silence. Back inside, I locked every door and window, sliding the deadbolt home with a trembling hand. The apartment smelled of damp clothes and stale coffee, a faint trace of the incense I'd forgotten to light this morning. My phone buzzed again. Another new message from me, no escape. I dropped the phone on the table, the screen lighting up the peeling paint and scattered papers around me. I sat down hard, the chair scraping against the floor like a sudden scream in an empty room. The rain hammered the windows, relentless, like a countdown. I couldn't run. Not anymore. The network wasn't just a digital ghost in my accounts. It was real. Physical. Tangible. And it was here. The next morning came too quickly, the sun pushing through gray clouds like it was trying to burn away the night's residue. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that faceless figure standing under the street lamp, waiting. I told myself it was a warning. A threat. But it was also something else, proof that whatever this web was, I had crossed a point of no return. At work, my phone stayed buried in my bag. I avoided the usual screens, the emails from colleagues I'd never met. Every glance over my shoulder felt like the world was closing in, like someone was watching from just beyond my line of sight. Then, over lunch, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. "Don't trust your phone," the voice said. A woman's voice. Calm. Familiar but distant. They're watching everything. Even this call. My hands trembled, the plastic of the office phone slippery under my fingers. Who is this? What do you want? No time, she said. Meet me tonight. Same place. Midnight. Click. The line went dead. I stared at the receiver as if it might offer answers. Instead, I felt the slow, creeping certainty that there was no turning back. Every step I took was being tracked. Every choice manipulated. And the person or people pulling the strings were closer than I ever imagined. I thought about calling the police. But who would believe me? A man haunted by his own digital ghost, stalked by shadows in the rain. It sounded ridiculous. And yet, the message on my phone lingered, glowing bright in my mind, no escape. I realized then that this wasn't about hacking or identity theft anymore. It was about control. About breaking me down until I was nothing but a puppet in a game I didn't understand. I had to know why. So I made the decision. I would go back. Back to that street lamp. Back to the rain. Because if I didn't, I'd already lost. The clock ticked toward midnight as I stood by my window, watching the empty street. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick, heavy with silence. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, sharp and solitary. I pulled my coat tight around me, the rough fabric grounding me in the moment. I had no idea who was waiting for me. But I knew I had to face them. Because this was no longer a game. It was survival. The street lamp flickered again, casting long, jittery shadows that stretched across the wet pavement like fingers reaching out for me. I glanced up and down the street. Empty. Too empty. The silence felt thick, like the kind you notice only after all the usual noise disappears. No cars. No footsteps. The distant dog was quiet now. No wind either. Just me, the flickering light, and the rain-slicked pavement reflecting the murky glow of the city. Which was exactly why I felt I wasn't alone. I'd been replaying that message over and over in my head. No escape. It wasn't just a taunt anymore. It was a promise. And I was beginning to realize just how literal it might be. I stepped forward, boots clicking against the uneven concrete. Each step echoed unnaturally, swallowed by the night. My eyes darted to the alley beside the lamppost, shadows pulled in there, thick and black. I wanted to convince myself it was just a trick of the light. But I knew better. There was something waiting. I could feel it pressing against the backs of my eyes, crawling beneath my skin. Who's there? My voice cracked, brittle and small. Silence. Complete silence. A rustle from the alley. A breath too quick, too close. I spun around, heart hammering against ribs like a trapped bird. Nothing. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the tremor in my hands. The air was cold, biting at my cheeks and nose. I could taste the metallic tang again. It clung to my tongue like a warning. I wasn't imagining this. Someone wanted me here. Someone knew I'd come back. Why, though? What game was this? I thought about calling out again, but the words stuck in my throat. The street lamp flickered one last time before going out completely, plunging me into darkness. The sudden blackness was suffocating. My breath caught, and I fumbled for my phone. The screen lit up with a soft glow. A new message blinked on, stark and chilling. Look behind you. I swallowed hard, every nerve screaming. Slowly, almost involuntarily, I turned. The alley was empty. Or so it seemed. Then, a figure stepped out from the shadows, a man. Tall, lean, face obscured by the hood of his jacket. My stomach clenched so tight I thought I might be sick. Who are you? I asked, voice trembling despite myself. He didn't answer. Just stood there, silent, like a statue carved from night. Why are you doing this? I pressed. Still nothing. The silence grew heavier, pressing down on me like a weight. I wanted to run, but my feet were glued to the spot. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he reached up and pulled back his hood. The man's face was blank. No features. Not blurred, but completely smooth, like a wax mask that had melted and reformed. My breath hitched. I stepped back instinctively, nearly tripping over a broken bottle. Don't, he said, voice low and distorted, as if coming through a cracked speaker. That was the moment the world tilted. My mind screamed for logic, for reason. But this was neither. I wanted to close my eyes, to shake my head and wake up somewhere normal. Instead, I stumbled backward, heart pounding hard enough to drown out everything else. Who are you? What do you want from me? My voice broke. He took a step forward, and the pavement beneath him seemed to shimmer, like the heat from a summer sidewalk. But the air was cold. I could see my breath, little puffs of fog dissolving into the night. I'm Hugh, he said simply. The words sounded like a riddle. I shook my head, disbelieving. That's impossible. No, he said, voice echoing oddly, "It's inevitable." The street lamp flickered back on, bathing the alley in a harsh, yellow light. For a moment, the man's face was just a shadow again. Then he vanished. Just like that. No footsteps. No sound. Only the rain, starting again, soft, insistent, like a warning. I stood there, frozen, the bitter taste of fear creeping up my throat. My hands trembled, and I realized they were clutching my phone too tightly. I had to get out. Back to the apartment. Back to whatever safety I could find. But as I turned, I caught sight of something on the wet sidewalk. A message, scrawled in wet dirt, letters smeared but legible, "We're watching." I swallowed the lump in my throat and ran. Back inside my apartment, the familiar hum of the heater was both a comfort and a reminder of how vulnerable I was. I locked the door twice, pressing my back against it, listening for any sign that I'd been followed. The stale air smelled of dust and old paper, a sharp contrast to the damp night outside. I sat at my desk, fingers shaking as I typed "faceless network" into the search bar again. Every click felt like a countdown. The screen filled with news stories about data breaches, identity manipulation, and psychological operations. Nothing concrete, nothing that felt close enough to grab onto. My phone buzzed. Another message. "Why fight?" I stared at it. The words weren't threatening, exactly. More like a challenge. A question with no answer. I wanted to reply, to shout back, to demand they stop. But my fingers hovered uncertainly. Instead, I closed the phone and leaned back in my chair, eyes shut tight. I felt trapped in a maze with no exit, every path leading deeper into darkness. Then, a knock at the door. Sharp, deliberate. Not a tap or a hesitant pause. Like whoever was outside wanted me to know they were there. My breath caught. I slid quietly to the door and peered through the peephole. No one. I blinked. The hallway was empty, the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights above my floor humming softly. I stepped back, heart still racing, and looked down. There, on the mat, a small, folded piece of paper. I picked it up, fingers numb. Unfolded it slowly. In neat, typed letters, "You can't hide." The room suddenly felt colder, darker, as if the walls themselves were closing in. I backed away from the door, eyes darting to every shadow. Then my phone buzzed again. This time, a photo. It was me, sitting in this very chair, taken from somewhere behind. I spun around. Empty room. I wasn't alone. Not by a long shot. The silence after the knock was worse than the noise itself. I sat frozen for what might have been minutes, the paper crumpled in my hand, my breath shallow and rapid. That photo, the message, someone was watching, but no one showed themselves. The room felt like a trap, the shadows stretching longer, darker. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat by the window, the city's distant murmur barely brushing against the glass. The air smelled faintly of rain, damp and cold. My mind cycled through every possibility, every face that might be behind this. But no one came to mind. No one I knew. No one I trusted. Dawn crept in pale and hesitant through the blinds. I finally let myself breathe, but the tension didn't leave. It clung to my skin like a second layer. I didn't want to call anyone, not yet. What would I say? Someone is using my accounts to send messages I never wrote. It sounded insane. Absurd. Crazy, right? And who would believe me? The next morning, I went back to the office, although my legs felt like lead. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the familiar hum now a source of unease. I passed colleagues who smiled politely but with a distance I hadn't noticed before. Some glanced at me sideways, as if they sensed something wrong but weren't sure what. I sat at my desk, staring at my computer. The emails, the messages, I needed to understand how deep this went. I opened my sent folder and scrolled through the last 2 weeks. There they were, messages I hadn't typed, sent to people I'd never met. The words were polite, almost disarmingly so, but the content was off. Requests for meetings, vague references to projects I didn't know existed, promises I couldn't keep. I printed a few of them out, the paper feeling cold and strange beneath my fingertips. I traced the edges, wondering how easily someone could slip inside my digital life and rewrite it. When I looked up, my manager was standing there, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "You okay?" he asked, voice low. I hesitated. "Actually, no. There's something going on. Messages sent from my account. I don't know who's doing it." He frowned, stepping closer. "You think someone's hacked you?" I nodded, swallowing hard. "I'm not sure. But it's more than that. It's like someone's trying to replace me. To make me say things I didn't say." His eyes narrowed, but then he gave a slow nod. "Let me know what you find. We can get IT involved." The word IT made my stomach twist. They were usually slow, bureaucratic, and often more interested in covering their own backs than solving anything. I spent the day combing through logs, trying to track the intrusion. Every time I thought I had a lead, it vanished. IP addresses masked, devices untraceable. Whoever was behind this had layers of anonymity. And yet, they wanted me to know. The messages, the photo, the note, they weren't just thefts. They were warnings. That evening, I sat in my apartment with the lights dimmed low, the city noises distant and muted. I felt hollowed out, like a shell left empty by something too big to grasp. My phone buzzed again. I stared at the screen, reluctant. The message was simple. Why run? I typed back, fingers trembling. "Who are you?" No reply. I closed the phone and leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old paper, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound. I thought about everything that had happened to the stolen identity, the threats, the faceless presence lurking just out of sight. And then I realized something. Fear was exactly what whoever this was wanted. The isolation, the confusion, the doubt. It was a game, and I was the piece being moved around the board. But I wasn't going to be their pawn anymore. The next morning, I made a decision. I would take control of what I could. I changed all my passwords, complex, random strings that even I had trouble remembering. I called IT and insisted on a full audit of my accounts. They were reluctant but eventually agreed. I set up two-factor authentication everywhere, locked down every device I owned. Still, the sense of being watched didn't fade. I started keeping a journal, writing down every strange occurrence, every odd message, every fleeting suspicion. It grounded me, gave me something solid in the swirling fog. Days turned into a week. The messages stopped. But the silence that followed was heavier than the threats had been. I found myself scanning every shadow, jumping at every unexpected sound. My hand shook when the phone rang, even if it was just a wrong number or a telemarketer. One afternoon, my manager pulled me aside again. "I have to say, you've handled this better than I expected," he said, voice quieter than usual. "You're still here. Still working." I nodded, but the weight of the unspoken lingered. I don't know why it happened. Or who did it. He looked at me long, then said, "Sometimes the hardest part is not knowing." I agreed. The experience changed me. I stopped trusting so easily, started questioning everything. But it also made me more cautious, more aware of the fragility of identity in a digital world. The faceless network that had tried to unravel me hadn't succeeded. Not entirely. Yet, sometimes, late at night, when the city outside was quiet and the hum of the apartment settled into my bones, I could still feel it, an echo of eyes watching, waiting. A reminder that the web was still out there, invisible but present. And I was still caught in it. But now I knew how to fight back. Not with force, but with vigilance. With refusal to vanish quietly. Because the greatest horror wasn't the shadow itself, it was the slow unraveling of self, piece by piece, until you didn't know where you ended and the darkness began. I closed my journal and looked out the window. The streetlights flickered, steady and sure. Tomorrow would be another day. And I would be ready.